A glittering masquerade ball at Blackwood Manor, where silk masks hide deadly secrets. A scream pierces the music. A diplomat lies dead, poisoned. Hercule Poirot steps into a web of lies, betrayal, and murder. Who is the killer behind the crimson cloak? What sinister secret did the victim uncover? In a dance of deception, every step could be fatal. Can Poirot unmask the truth before the next victim falls? Chapter 1. The Invitation's Enigma. The late afternoon sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Hercule Poirot's London apartment, illuminating the meticulous order of his study. Every book on the mahogany shelves was aligned with precision. The silver inkstand gleamed, and the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and lavender. Poirot sat at his desk, his small, fastidious hands smoothing the edges of an envelope that had arrived with the morning post. It was no ordinary letter. The paper was heavy, embossed with a crushed raven clutching a ruby in its talon's end. Sealed with crimson wax, the invitation within was penned in elegant calligraphy, requesting his presence at a grand masquerade ball at Blackwood Manor, hosted by Lord Reginald Ashburn. The closing line intrigued him. A secret awaits, one only. A mind like yours may uncover. Poirot's mustache twitched as he reread the words. Mon Dieu, he murmured, his green eyes narrowing. A secret, you say? And why, precisement, does one invite Hercule Poirot to such an affair, if not for mischief? He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and allowed his little gray cells to stir. A masquerade ball, with its masks and shadows, was a stage ripe for deception. He could not resist. The journey to Blackwood Manor was a study in contrasts. London's clamor faded as the train wound through rolling hills, where autumn had painted the landscape in hues of amber and scarlet. Poirot, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his patent leather shoes gleaming, observed his fellow passengers with quiet amusement. A young couple whispered excitedly about the ball, their voices tinged with anticipation. An older gentleman, his face half hidden by a newspaper, seemed less enthused, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm. Poirot noted it all, filing each detail away. Blackwood Manor loomed against the twilight sky, a sprawling Gothic edifice with ivy-clad towers and gargoyles leering from the eaves. Carriages lined the gravel drive, their horses snorting clouds of steam into the crisp air. Masked guests disembarked, their costumes a riot of silk, velvet, and feathers peacocks. Harlequins and phantom-like figures gliding toward the manor's glowing entrance. Poirot adjusted his own mask, a sleek black domino that accentuated his sharp features, and stepped into the fray. His cane clicked against the stone steps, a steady counterpoint to the music spilling from within. The ballroom was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across gilded walls, and a string quartet played a haunting waltz. Guests swirled in pairs, their masks concealing identities but not intentions. Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloging details. The way a woman in a peacock mask tilted her head to deliberately toward a man in a jester's cap. The nervous fidgeting of a tall figure in a crimson cloak near the punch bowl. He sipped a glass of champagne, its bubbles sharp against his palate, and began to circulate. Lord Reginald Ashburn, their host, was unmistakable despite his masked golden lion's face, with a mane of silk threads. His broad shoulders and commanding presence drew eyes as he greeted guests with practiced charm. Monsieur Poirot, he boomed, clapping a hand on Poirot's shoulder. I am honored you accepted my invitation. A man of your reputation adds distinction to our little gathering. Poirot inclined his head. The honor is mine, milord. But tell me, what is the secret you hinted in your invitation? Hercule Poirot does not attend balls merely for the dancing. Ashburn's laugh was hearty, but his eyes, visible through the masked slits, flickered. Patience, my friend. All will be revealed in time. Enjoy the evening. He swept away, leaving Poirot to ponder the evasion. As the night deepened, Poirot engaged in polite conversation, his ears attuned to every nuance. He spoke with Lady Beatrice Langley, a striking woman in a sapphire gown and a mask adorned with peacock feathers. Her wit was sharp, but her glances toward Ashburn were sharper still. "Our host is full of surprises," she said, her voice low. "But not all are pleasant." Before Poirot could probe further, she excused herself, her silk skirts rustling like whispers. Next, he encountered Victor Crane, a composer whose fall from grace had been the talk of London salons. Crane's mask, a stark white affair with musical notes painted in gold, did little to hide his gaunt features. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you believe in redemption?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "For those who seek it sincerely, but sincerity is a rare commodity." Crane's smile was brittle, and he drifted back into the crowd. The clock struck 11, and the atmosphere grew feverish. The waltz gave way to a livelier tune, and the dancers moved with abandon. Poirot stood near a marble pillar, observing a group of guests near the refreshment table. A man in a crimson cloak whom Poirot had noted earlier reached for a glass of champagne, his gloved hand trembling. Beside him, a woman in a silver mask laughed loudly, her eyes darting nervously. Poirot's instincts prickled. Something was amiss. Then it happened. A piercing scream cut through the music, silencing the room. The crowd parted, revealing a figure crumpled on the floor, a man in a harlequin mask. His champagne glass shattered beside him. His body convulsed once, then stilled. Gasps rippled through the guests as Poirot knelt beside the man, his fingers deftly checking for a pulse. There was none. The man's lips were tinged blue, his eyes wide with shot beneath the mask. "Moan. Do," Poirot whispered. He lifted the mask, revealing the face of Monsieur Henry Dubois, a French diplomat known for his work in international trade. Poirot's mind raced. Poison, almost certainly. But how, and by whom? He stood, his voice calm, but commanding. "No one is to leave this room. A crime has been committed, and Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth." The guests murmured, some in fear, others in defiance. Lord Ashburn pushed through the crowd, his lion mask askew. "This is outrageous. Surely an accident." "No accident, milord," Poirot interrupted, his tone sharp. "This was murder." He gestured to the broken glass, its contents seeping into the polished floor. The poison was in the champagne. "We must secure the scene and question all present," as footmen moved to guard the exits. Poirot's eyes scanned the room. The peacock-masked woman, Lady Beatrice, stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly. Victor Crane clutched his glass as if it were a lifeline. The crimson-cloaked man was nowhere to be seen. Poirot's little gray cells hummed. The masquerade had become a deadly dance, and he was determined to lead it to its conclusion. He began with the staff, questioning a trembling maid who had served the champagne. "Did you see anyone tamper with the glasses?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. She shook her head, tears welling. "No, monsieur. But there was a man in a red cloak. He lingered near the table, and I saw him switch a glass with another." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A lead, however small. He moved to the guests, starting with those closest to the refreshment table. A young artist, her mask painted with stars, claimed she saw nothing unusual, but her fidgeting hands betrayed her nerves. An elderly baron, his mask a grotesque gargoyle, insisted he was too drunk to notice anything. Poirot listened, observed, and filed away every detail. The crimson cloak was a thread he would follow, but he sensed deeper currents at play. As the night wore on, Poirot pieced together a timeline. Dubois had arrived late, his demeanor agitated. He had spoken briefly with Lord Ashburn, then with Lady Beatrice, before taking the fatal glass. Poirot examined the broken shards, noting a faint residue that confirmed his suspicion of cyanide. The poison was fast-acting, meaning the glass had been tampered with moments before Dubois drank. The killer was bold, striking in a crowded room. Poirot approached Lord Ashburn again, this time in a quiet alcove. "Milord, you knew Monsieur Dubois." What was his purpose here? Ashburn hesitated, his fingers tightening on his cane. He was a guest, like any other. We discussed trade, nothing more. Poirot's smile was thin, and yet he is dead, and you are evasive. Tell me, what is the secret you promised to reveal? Ashburn's jaw tightened. You overstep. Poirot, I am no murderer. But his eyes betrayed unease, and Poirot let the matter rest for now. He returned to the ballroom, where the guests had grown restless. Lady Beatrice approached him, her peacock mask glinting. Monsieur Poirot, this is dreadful. Poor Henry. Do you suspect one of us? Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered. Toward the shadows, Madame, in a masquerade, all are suspects until proven otherwise. Poirot replied, but rest assured, the truth will unmask itself. She nodded, her lips tight, and retreated. Poirot's mind churned, the invitation's promise of a secret, Dubois' death, the crimson cloak. The nervous glances all were pieces of a puzzle. He recalled a detail from earlier. A guest in a silver mask had brushed against Dubois just before he took the glass. Was it a distraction? A signal? He resolved to find the silver-masked woman next. As the clock neared midnight, Poirot stood, alone, the ballroom's gaiety now a hollow echo. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells dance. The killer was here, hidden among the masks, but they could not hide forever. Hercule Poirot would see to that. The chapter closed with him stepping into the shadows, determined to follow the trail of the crimson cloak and unravel the enigma that had turned a night of revelry into one of death. Chapter 2. Shadows behind the masked grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor shimmered, under the glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers, their light refracting through the air like a kaleidoscope of stars. The masquerade was in full swing, a swirling vortex of silks, satins, and secrets, masks adorned with peacock feathers, gilded filigree, and velvet ribbons concealed the faces of the elite, their laughter and chatter rising above the lilting strains of a string quartet. Hercule Poirot, his sharp eyes scanning the room, stood apart from the revelry, his small, fastidious frame clad in an impeccable black suit, his own mask a simple domino of ebony silk that did little to obscure his distinctive mustache. The scream that had shattered the evening still echoed in his mind. It had come just as the clock struck 10. A piercing cry that silenced the music and froze the dancers mid-step. A masked figure in a crimson cloak had collapsed near the grand staircase, a goblet of champagne slipping from their lifeless hand to shatter on the marble floor. The guests had parted like a tide, revealing the crumpled form of Monsieur Etienne Dubois, a diplomat of some renown. Poirot had been among the first to reach him. Noting the faint froth at the corner of Dubois' mouth and the unnatural rigidity of his limbs. Poison, he had concluded almost instantly, his mind already racing to catalog the details of the scene. Now, an hour later, the body had been discreetly removed to a parlor, under the pretext of a sudden illness, and the ball continued, albeit with a nervous undercurrent. Lord Reginald Ashburn, the host, had insisted on maintaining the full weight of festivity. Though his pale face and taut smile betrayed his unease, Poirot, however, was not one to be swayed by appearances. He had already begun his investigation, his little gray cells humming with activity as he moved through the crowd, observing, listening, and probing. The ballroom was a labyrinth of motives, each guest a potential suspect. Poirot's first task was to identify those closest to Dubois in the moments before his death. He approached a group near the refreshment table, where a woman in a silver mask shaped like a crescent moon was holding court. Her laughter was bright, but her eyes, visible through the slits of her mask, darted nervously. "Madam," Poirot began, bowing slightly, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek to understand the tragedy that has befallen our evening. Might I have the honor of your name?" The woman's laughter faltered, and she tilted her head, assessing him. "Lady Beatrice Haverford," she replied, her voice smooth as velvet, but edged with caution. "A dreadful affair, Monsieur Poirot. Poor Monsieur Dubois. I barely knew him, though we exchanged pleasantries earlier." Indeed, Poirot's tone was polite, but his eyes missed nothing the slight tremor in her gloved hand, the way her gaze flicked toward a man across the room. "And where were you, Lady Beatrice, when the scream was heard?" "Oh, near the orchestra, I believe," she said airily, waving a hand, dancing with Eo. "Who was it? Lord Carver, perhaps." She laughed again, but it rang hollow. Poirot made a mental note of her vagueness and moved on, his attention drawn to the man. She had glanced at a tall figure and a harlequin mask, his black and white costume stark against the vibrant crowd. This, Poirot learned, was Victor Crane, a composer whose once promising career had been tarnished by scandal. Crane's posture was stiff, his hands clenched at his sides as he spoke to a young woman. "In a peacock blue gown, Monsieur Crane," Poirot said, approaching with a disarming smile. "A moment, if you please. I am investigating the unfortunate demise of Monsieur Dubois. You are acquainted with him, non?" Crane's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "Barely," he said curtly. "We spoke once or twice. He was the man of many acquaintances." "And yet," Poirot pressed, "you seem troubled, monsieur. Perhaps you saw something, or heard something, before the tragedy." Crane hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I saw nothing," he said finally, his voice low. "I was by the terrace doors, speaking with the friend." The young woman beside him, her face half hidden by a feathered mask, spoke up, Clara Duval. She introduced herself, her accent faintly French. "I can confirm Monsieur Crane was with me. We were discussing the music." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most interesting," he murmured. "And the champagne, Mademoiselle Duval. Did you partake?" Her eyes widened slightly. "No, I prefer wine." "A wise choice, perhaps," Poirot said, his tone light, but his gaze piercing. He excused himself, filing away their responses. The champagne, he was certain, was the key. Dubois' goblet had been one of many on a silver tray, passed among the guests by a liveried footman. The poison, likely a fast-acting toxin like cyanide, had been administered with precision, suggesting premeditation. As Poirot moved toward the refreshment table, he caught sight of Lord Ashburn, deep in conversation with a portly man in a golden lion mask. The host's gestures were animated, his voice low but urgent. Poirot edged closer, catching fragments of their exchange. "Cannot afford a scandal, Reginald," the man was saying. "If word gets out, it won't," Ashburn snapped, his eyes darting around. He noticed Poirot and froze, then forced a smile. "Monsieur Poirot, enjoying the ball, I hope." "Most assuredly," Poirot replied, his tone bland, "though I find myself distracted by the loss of Monsieur Dubois. A tragedy, none. You knew him well." Ashburn's smile tightened. "Not particularly. A guest of a guest, you might say. He was well connected." "Indeed," Poirot said, noting the evasive answer. "And the champagne, Monsieur le Lord, it was from your cellars, I presume?" "Of course," Ashburn said quickly. "The finest vintage, I assure you. It was thoroughly vetted." "Vetted, perhaps," Poirot said, "but not immune to tampering." He let the words hang, watching Ashburn's face pale further. Before the Lord could respond, Poirot bowed and moved away, his mind turning over the possibilities. The next hour was a whirlwind of interviews. Poirot spoke to a dozen guests, each offering a carefully crafted alibi or a vague recollection of the evening's events. A dowager in a sapphire mask claimed to have been admiring the manor's tapestries. A young viscount swore he was flirting with a masked lady by the fountain. A merchant in a jester's mask insisted he was sampling the caviar when the scream rang out. Each story was plausible, yet none felt entirely true. Poirot's attention returned to the champagne. He sought out the footman who had served the fatal goblet, a nervous young man named Thomas with a shock of red hair. Thomas was polishing glasses in a corner, his hands trembling slightly. "Monsieur Thomas," Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, "you served the champagne. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual? A guest lingering near the tray, perhaps, or a glass that seemed out of place?" Thomas swallowed hard. I don't know, sir. It was so busy. I handed out dozens of glasses. I didn't see anything." Odd. Poirot leaned closer, his eyes locking onto the footman's. "Think carefully, mon ami. A life has been taken. Even the smallest detail may be of importance." Thomas hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There was one thing, sir. A lady, she didn't give her name, asked me to set aside a glass for her. Said it was for a friend who preferred a specific vintage. I thought it was strange, but I did it. It was one of the last glasses on the tray." Poirot's heart quickened. "And this lady, what did she look like?" "She wore a silver mask, like a moon," Thomas said, "and a white gown with pearls." Lady Beatrice. Poirot's mind raced. Had she orchestrated the poisoning, or was she merely a pawn? He thanked Thomas and made his way back to the ballroom, his eyes scanning for the crescent moon mask. Before he could find her, a commotion near the grand staircase drew his attention. A small crowd had gathered, whispering excitedly. Poirot pushed through, his heart sinking as he saw a folded piece of paper lying on the floor. Half hidden beneath a velvet curtain, he knelt, careful not to touch it directly, and used a handkerchief to retrieve it. The note was written in a hurried scrawl. "The eye of the serpent is not yours. Return it, or more will fall." Poirot's pulse quickened. The eye of the serpentine artifact, perhaps a jewel, a relic, or something more arcane. He tucked the note into his pocket, his mind already connecting it to Dubois' diplomatic work. Had the man been involved in something beyond mere politics? He sought out Lady Beatrice again, finding her near a marble statue, sipping wine and laughing with a group of admirers. Her silver mask gleamed in the candlelight, but her posture stiffened as Poirot approached. "Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice low, "a word, if you please." She excused herself from her companions and followed him to a quiet alcove. "What is it, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her tone cool. Poirot held up the note, careful not to reveal its contents. "A curious discovery, madam. A note found near the scene of the crime. It speaks of an artifact, the eye of the serpent. You know of it, perhaps?" Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. "I've never heard of such a thing," she said, her voice steady. "You think it's connected to Dubois?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, watching her closely. "And the champagne, madam? You requested a specific glass, did you not?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. She recovered quickly, laughing. "Oh, that, a silly whim. I prefer the '08 vintage, you see. I meant no harm." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course, madam, a whim." He bowed and let her return to her admirers, but his mind was far from satisfied. Lady Beatrice was hiding something, and he would uncover it. As the night wore on, Poirot continued his inquiries, piecing together the puzzle. He learned that Victor Crane had once been commissioned to compose for a royal court, only to be disgraced when accused of stealing a valuable manuscript. The scandal had left him bitter, desperate to reclaim his status. Could he have targeted Dubois for some perceived slight? And Clara Duval, her connection to Crane was unclear, but her nervous demeanor suggested more than a casual acquaintance. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft clink near the refreshment table. He turned to see a footman retrieving a fallen glass, its contents spilled across the floor. The liquid shimmered oddly in the light, and Poirot's instincts flared. He approached, kneeling to examine the spill. A faint, bitter scent reached his nostrils, cyanide, unmistakable. He summoned Thomas again. "This glass," Poirot said, pointing. "It was on the tray with the others." Thomas nodded, his face pale. "Yes, sir. And I didn't notice anything wrong. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The poison had been in the champagne, as he suspected. But the precision of the delivery was remarkable. Only Dubois' glass had been tampered with, suggesting a killer with access and opportunity. He dismissed Thomas and returned to the ballroom, his mind racing. By midnight, Poirot had gathered enough to form a hypothesis. The killer had known Dubois would take a specific glass, perhaps marked in some subtle way. Lady Beatrice's request for a reserved glass was too convenient, but her composure suggested she was either innocent or a masterful liar. Crane's bitterness and Duval's nervousness were equally suspicious, and Lord Ashburn's evasive demeanor hinted at deeper involvement. As the orchestra struck up a new waltz, Poirot stood by a pillar, his eyes scanning the masked faces. The killer was among them, he was certain, hiding behind a facade of elegance. But Hercule Poirot was not fooled by masks. He would peel them away, one by one, until the truth was laid bare. The chapter closed with Poirot's gaze settling on the refreshment table, where a fresh tray of champagne glasses sparkled. He stepped forward, his fingers brushing the stem of a glass, and a faint smile curved his lips. The dance of deception had only just begun, but Poirot was ready to lead. Chapter 3. The walls of Alibis's grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor pulsed with life, its chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over the swirling dancers. The masquerade ball continued unabated, as if the chilling scream that had pierced the night mere hours ago was but a fleeting disturbance. The guests, adorned in their elaborate masks and silken finery, moved through the steps of a waltz, their laughter and chatter a delicate veneer over the undercurrent of unease. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the dance floor, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. The murder of Monsieur Dubois, the diplomat who had collapsed with a poisoned glass of champagne, hung over the evening like a storm cloud, and Poirot was determined to pierce the fog of deception that cloaked the truth. He adjusted his bow tie, his movements precise, and murmured to himself, "The dance of alibis is a delicate one, n'est-ce pas? Each step must be measured, each turn scrutinized, for in the rhythm of their words, the guilty will falter." His mustache twitched slightly as he observed the guests, their masks a perfect metaphor for the lies they wove. The victim, Monsieur Dubois, had been no ordinary diplomat. Poirot had learned from a discreet conversation with a footman that Dubois was investigating a smuggling ring, one rumored to traffic in rare jewels and artifacts across Europe's borders. This revelation had sharpened Poirot's focus, for it suggested a motive far darker than a personal grudge. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of color and motion, but Poirot's attention was drawn to a cluster of guests near the refreshment table. Lady Beatrice, the cunning heiress whose sharp tongue and sharper wit had already caught his notice, stood there, her emerald mask glinting as she sipped a glass of wine. Beside her was Victor Crane, the disgraced composer, his posture tense as he exchanged heated words with a man in a silver mask. Poirot noted the way Crane's hands clenched, the slight tremor in his fingers a sign of nerves, perhaps, or guilt. The man in the silver mask, whom Poirot recognized as Sir Henry Whitmore, a retired naval officer with a penchant for gambling, seemed equally agitated. His voice low but intense, Poirot approached, his steps silent on the polished floor. "Pardon, messieurs, madam," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Might I have a word? The events of this evening, they are most distressing. None. I seek only to understand the movements of our poor Monsieur Dubois before his untimely demise." Lady Beatrice turned, her eyes narrowing behind her mask. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you," she said, her tone laced with a mix of amusement and wariness. "But surely you don't suspect us of anything so sordid." "We were merely enjoying the ball, naturellement," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "Yet, in a room so full of elegance, it is curious how secrets hide in plain sight. Monsieur Dubois, he was seen near this very table before his collapse. Perhaps one of you noticed something unusual?" Victor Crane's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Sir Henry before speaking. I barely knew the man, he said, his voice clipped. I was dancing with Clara Duval for most of the evening. She can confirm it. Clara Duval, Poirot repeated, his mind cataloging the name. The young woman, a painter of some repute, had been notably quiet during his earlier inquiries. And you, Sir Henry? Your presence at the table was noted by a footman. Sir Henry's laugh was forced, a hollow sound. I was fetching a drink for my wife, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more. Dubois was alive and well when I saw him last, chatting with that ambassador fellow, Leclerc. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ambassador Leclerc, a most interesting observation. He made a mental note to seek out Leclerc, whose name had surfaced more than once in connection with Dubois. The alibis were piling up, each guest offering a carefully rehearsed account of their movements. But Poirot knew that truth often lay in the gaps between their words. As the waltz swelled, Poirot moved through the crowd, his questions gentle but relentless. He spoke to Clara Duval, who confirmed Crane's alibi but seemed distracted, her eyes darting toward the ballroom's grand staircase. He questioned a baroness who claimed to have been in the powder room, a merchant who insisted he was admiring the Manor's art collection, and a young lord who swore he was lost in a card game. Each alibi was plausible, yet none felt entirely solid. Like a house of cards waiting for a single misstep to collapse, the night deepened, and Poirot's inquiries were interrupted by a commotion near the servants' entrance. A footman, young and pale, stumbled into the ballroom, his uniform disheveled. "Help," he cried, his voice cracking. "It's Thomas, he's dead." The music faltered, and the dancers froze, their masks unable to hide their shock. Poirot was at the footman's side in an instant, his calm authority cutting through the panic. "Show me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The footman led him to a narrow corridor off the ballroom, where a second body lay crumpled against the wall. Thomas, another footman, was slumped in an unnatural pose, his face purpled, and a thin cord wrapped tightly around his neck. Strangulation, Poirot noted, his mind racing. The method was starkly different from the poison that had felled Dubois, yet the proximity of the crime suggested a connection. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. Kneeling beside the body, his eyes scanned the scene, noting the scuff marks on the floor, the faint smear of blood on Thomas's collar, and, most curiously, a faint scent lingering in the air. He leaned closer, inhaling deeply. "Perfume," he said softly. "A fragrance, delicate yet distinctive. Lilac, perhaps, with a hint of jasmine." He stood, turning to the gathered crowd, which now included Lord Ashburn, whose face was pale beneath his gold mask. "This is a tragedy," Ashburn said, his voice trembling. "First Dubois, now poor Thomas. What madness has overtaken my home?" "Madness, perhaps," Poirot replied, his gaze steady. "Or calculation. Tell me, Lord Ashburn, did Thomas have access to sensitive areas of the manor? The wine cellars, perhaps, or the private rooms?" Ashburn hesitated, then nodded. "He was a trusted servant. He had keys to most areas." "Most interesting," Poirot said. Filing the information away, he turned to the footman who had raised the alarm. "And you, monsieur, where were you when you found him?" "I was fetching more champagne," the footman stammered. "I saw him lying there, just like that." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The footman's story was plausible, but the tremor in his voice suggested fear or something more. He made a mental note to revisit the young man later, when the shock had worn off and the truth might slip more easily from his lips. As the guests were ushered back to the ballroom, Poirot lingered in the corridor, his mind piecing together the puzzle, to murders, to methods, yet both victims bore the same faint perfume. It was no coincidence. The killer, he reasoned, was someone with access to both the ballroom and the servants' quarters. Someone who moved freely among the guests yet could slip into the shadows unnoticed. He returned to the ballroom, where the mood had shifted from festive to funereal. The guests whispered among themselves. Their masks no longer symbols of revelry, but shields against suspicion. Poirot approached Ambassador Leclerc, a tall man with a hawkish nose and a black velvet mask. "Monsieur Leclerc," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. "You were seen speaking with Monsieur Dubois shortly before his death. Might you share the nature of your conversation?" Leclerc's smile was thin, almost predatory. "A trivial matter, Monsieur Poirot. We discussed trade agreements, nothing more." Dubois was preoccupied, I thought. He kept glancing at his watch, as if expecting someone. "Expecting someone?" Poirot repeated, his mind seizing on the detail. "And did you see who he met?" Leclerc shrugged. "I was called away to greet another guest. I saw nothing unusual." Poirot nodded, but his instincts told him Leclerc was holding back. The ambassador's composure was too perfect, his answers too rehearsed. He made a note to investigate Leclerc's background, particularly his ties to Dubois and the smuggling ring. As the night wore on, Poirot continued his inquiries, piecing together a timeline of Dubois's final moments. The diplomat had arrived at the ball at 8 o'clock, mingling freely until 9, when he was seen at the refreshment table. By 9:30, he had collapsed. The poison swift and merciless Thomas, the footman, had been alive at 9:15, when he was seen carrying a tray of glasses, but dead by 10, when the second footman found him. The window of opportunity for both murders was narrow, suggesting a killer who was both bold and precise. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by Clara Duval, who approached him with a hesitant step. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I saw something earlier. I didn't think it mattered. But now, with Thomas dead, speak, mademoiselle," Poirot urged, his eyes gentle but piercing. "No detail is too small, Clara. Glance around, ensuring no one was within earshot." "It was Victor Crane," she whispered. "I saw him near the servants' entrance just before 10. He looked agitated, as if he was hiding something." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most illuminating. Mademoiselle, and you are certain of the time?" She nodded, her hands twisting nervously. "I was checking my watch, planning to leave early. I didn't want to stay after what happened to Dubois." Poirot thanked her and watched as she melted back into the crowd. Crane's presence near the servants' entrance was a significant clue, but it was not enough to accuse him outright. The perfume, the smuggling ring, the alibis all were threads in a tapestry that was slowly taking shape. He moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, where a small table held a vase of lilies. He inhaled deeply, confirming his suspicion. The same perfume he had detected on both victims was present here. Faint but unmistakable, someone had lingered at this table, someone whose scent had marked both crime scenes. It was a small clue, but to Poirot, it was as glaring as a spotlight. The music shifted to a slower, mournful tune, and Poirot's gaze swept the room once more. The killer was here, among the masked faces, their identity hidden behind a facade of elegance. But Poirot was undeterred. He would unravel their alibis, step by step, until the truth was laid bare. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot made a silent vow. The walls of alibis would end, and the murderer would face justice. The night was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was just beginning. Chapter 4. The hidden passage of the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor pulsed with life, its chandeliers casting a golden glow over the swirling dancers. Hercule Poirot stood near a marble pillar, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. The second murder, the strangled footman found in a shadowed alcove, had cast a pall over the masquerade. Yet the music played on, as if the guests were determined to dance away the fear. Poirot's mustache twitched as he observed the subtle glances, the forced laughter, the hands that lingered too long on champagne flutes. The killer was among them, he was certain, and the manor itself held secrets that might unmask the culprit. Poirot adjusted his pristine white gloves and moved through the crowd, his small, precise steps belying the urgency of his mission. The victim, Monsieur Dubois had been a diplomat with a reputation for discretion. Yet his investigation into a smuggling ring suggested he had enemies. The footman's death, marked by the same faint trace of jasmine perfume, confirmed to Poirot that the crimes were linked. But how and why? The answers, he suspected, lay not only in the guests but in the very walls of Blackwood Manor. He slipped away from the ballroom, his departure unnoticed amid the revelry. The manor's corridors were a labyrinth of oak-paneled walls and flickering gas lamps. Poirot's destination was the ballroom's eastern wing, where a tapestry depicting a medieval hunt had caught his eye earlier. Its intricate stitching seemed too heavy, too deliberate, as if concealing something. He paused before it, his fingers tracing the embroidered threads. The tapestry was indeed thicker than it should be, and a faint draft brushed against his knuckles. With a gentle tug, Poirot lifted the tapestry's edge. Behind it, a narrow wooden panel blended seamlessly with the wall. But a closer inspection revealed a hairline crack. He pressed lightly, and with a soft click, the panel swung inward, revealing a dark passage. The air was cool and musty, carrying the scent of stone and neglect. Poirot's lips curved into a small smile. Mon Dieu, he murmured, the manor keeps its secrets well, but not from Hercule Poirot. He stepped into the passage, his polished shoes tapping softly against the stone floor. The corridor was narrow, barely wide enough for his slight frame, and sloped downward, suggesting it led to a lower level of the manor. Poirot produced a small silver flashlight from his pocket of modern convenience. He permitted himself and its beam illuminated cobwebs and dust motes. The passage was old, likely predating the current manor, a remnant of some earlier structure. His mind raced with possibilities: an escape route, a smuggler's hideaway, or perhaps a place for clandestine meetings. As he descended, the beam caught a glint on the floor. Poirot knelt, his knees protesting slightly, and retrieved a small object, a single emerald, its facets catching the light like a green star. He turned it over in his gloved fingers, noting its flawless cut. A jewel, he mused, but not one meant for a lady's neck. None. This is contraband. The smuggling ring Dubois had been investigating was no mere rumor. This emerald was proof, and its presence in the passage suggested the killer had used this route to move unseen. Further along, Poirot found a torn scrap of fabric caught on a jagged stone. It was black silk, edged with silver thread, unmistakably part of a masquerade mask. He pocketed it carefully, his mind cataloging the masks he had seen that evening. Several guests had worn black, but the silver thread was distinctive. Was it a clue to the killer's identity, or a deliberate misdirection? Poirot's gray cells hummed with activity, piecing together the puzzle. The passage ended at a heavy iron door, rusted but sturdy. Poirot tested the handle, but it was locked. He examined the lock, noting its age and simplicity. A hairpin from a lady's coiffure might suffice. But Poirot carried no such tools. Instead, he made a mental note of the door's location. It likely led to the manor's cellars or an exterior exit, a path the killer might have taken after poisoning Dubois or strangling the footman. Returning to the ballroom, Poirot's thoughts turned to Lord Reginald Ashburn, the manor's enigmatic host. Ashburn had been charming but evasive when questioned about the manor's history, claiming it had been in his family for centuries. Yet his eyes had darted to the tapestry when Poirot mentioned hidden rooms. Did Ashburn know of the passage? Was he protecting someone or himself? Poirot re-entered the ballroom, where the dancers moved in a waltz, their masks glinting under the chandeliers. He approached Lord Ashburn, who stood near a refreshment table, his silver cane tapping idly against the floor. "Monsieur Poirot," Ashburn greeted, his voice smooth but tinged with unease. "You seem preoccupied. Is the ball not to your liking?" "On the contrary, milord," Poirot replied, his tone polite but probing. "The ball is most diverting, but I am intrigued by the manor itself. Such an old estate must have many secrets, hidden rooms, perhaps, or passages from a bygone era. Ashburn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Old houses are full of quirks, he said lightly. But I assure you, Blackwood Manor holds nothing more sinister than dusty attics and creaky floors. Poirot inclined his head, his eyes never leaving Ashburn's. And yet, milord, I find that old houses often whisper their truths to those who listen. Tell me, have you ever explored the manor's less frequented corners? Ashburn's grip on his cane tightened, but his expression remained composed. I leave such adventures to the servants, he said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to my guests. As Ashburn moved away, Poirot's gaze lingered on the cane. Its silver handle bore an intricate design, one he would examine more closely later. For now, he had another plan. The killer was cunning, but Poirot was more so. To catch a fox, one must set a trap, and Poirot knew just how to bait it. He approached a small group of guests, including Lady Beatrice, the cunning heiress, and Victor Crane, the disgraced composer. Their rivalry had been evident, their barbed exchanges barely concealed by the civility of the ball. Poirot leaned in, his voice low but audible. "Zamis," he said, "I have heard a most curious rumor. It seems a witness saw someone near the alcove, where the footman was found a figure in a black mask with silver thread. This witness, they say, is prepared to speak." The effect was immediate. Lady Beatrice's fan snapped shut, and Victor Crane's glass trembled in his hand. Clara Duval, a quiet young woman who had hovered at the edges of the group, paled visibly. Poirot noted their reactions, his mind cataloging each telltale sign. The rumor was false. Of course, a fabrication designed to unsettle the guilty. Someone in this room had used the hidden passage, and Poirot's words would force their hand. As the night wore on, Poirot remained vigilant, his eyes tracking the guests' movements. The music swelled, and the dancers spun faster, as if trying to outrun the shadow of death. Poirot sipped a glass of water, his only concession to the late hour, and considered the clues: the emerald, the torn mask, the locked door, and Ashburn's evasiveness. The smuggling ring was the key, he was certain. But the murder suggested a personal motive as well: greed, revenge, betrayal. The answer lay in the interplay of these guests, their secrets as intricate as the waltz they danced. Near midnight, Poirot noticed Clara Duval slip away from the ballroom. Her steps hurried. He followed at a discreet distance, his small frame blending into the shadows. She moved toward the eastern wing, pausing before the same tapestry Poirot had investigated. Her hands fumbled, as if searching for the panel. Poirot stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "Mademoiselle Duval, the night is late for such explorations." Clara gasped, spinning to face him. "Monsieur Poirot, I was merely admiring the tapestry." "Indeed." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And yet, you seem most interested in what lies behind it. Perhaps you know of the passage, and what it conceals." Clara's lips trembled, but she held his gaze. "I know nothing of passages," she said. "I only wish to clear my head." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then allow me to escort you back to the ballroom. The air here is, perhaps, too heavy with secrets." As they returned, Poirot's mind raced. Clara's reaction confirmed his suspicions. The passage was known to at least one guest, and her nervousness suggested involvement, though not necessarily guilt. The trap had been set, and now he must wait for the killer to make their next move. The night was far from over, and Blackwood Manor's secrets were only beginning to unravel. The hours passed, and the ball grew feverish. The guests' laughter tinged with desperation. Poirot stationed himself near the refreshment table, where he could observe the room without drawing attention. His eyes flicked to Lady Beatrice, who was deep in conversation with a masked gentleman, her gestures sharp and commanding. Victor Crane stood alone, his eyes darting nervously, while Lord Ashburn circulated with practiced ease, his cane glinting in the candlelight. Poirot's thoughts returned to the passage. The emerald suggested the smuggling ring was active, but the murders were too precise, too personal. The jasmine perfume linked the victims, but what linked the killer to the crimes? Was it a matter of protecting the smuggling operation, or something deeper? Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against his glass, a rhythm that mirrored his racing thoughts. A sudden commotion near the ballroom's entrance drew his attention. A servant approached Lord Ashburn, whispering urgently. Ashburn's face tightened, and he excused himself, moving toward the corridor. Poirot followed, his instincts on high alert. If the killer was making a move, this could be the moment. In the corridor, Ashburn paused before a portrait of a stern-faced ancestor, his cane tapping the floor. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but insistent. "Milord, a word, if you please. The manor's secrets are proving most illuminating. Tell me, what lies beyond the iron door in the passage behind the tapestry?" Ashburn's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. "I know of no such door," he said. "You must be mistaken, Monsieur Poirot." "Non, milord," Poirot replied, his tone unwavering. "I am never mistaken. The passage exists, and it holds clues to the murders. If you know something, it is best to speak now, before more blood is spilled." Ashburn hesitated, his fingers tightening on his cane. "You are a persistent man, Poirot," he said at last. "Very well. The manor has its secrets, but they are not mine to share. My family's history is complicated. Complicated enough to include smuggling," Poirot pressed, "or murder." Ashburn's face darkened. "You overstep, sir. I am no criminal, perhaps. Not," Poirot said, "but someone here is, and I will find them." As Ashburn turned away, Poirot's eyes fell on the cane once more. The silver handle bore an insignia stylized serpent coiled around a staff. It was familiar. Though he could not yet place it, the clue was significant, he was certain, and he would pursue it relentlessly. Returning to the ballroom, Poirot resumed his vigil, his mind a whirlwind of connections. The passage, the emerald, the mask, the perfume. The cane, all pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. The killer was close, and Poirot's trap was tightening. He would unmask them, no matter how cleverly they hid behind their masquerade dodges. The clock struck 1, the music paused, and a hush fell over the room. Poirot's senses sharpened. Something was about to happen, he could feel it, and when it did, Hercule Poirot would be ready. Chapter 5. A dance of deception. The grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor shimmered under the glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers, their light refracting into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across the polished marble floor. The masquerade ball, far from faltering after the grim discovery of Monsieur Dubois' poisoning, had taken on a feverish intensity, as though the guests were determined to drown their unease in the whirl of music and masks. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the room, his small, meticulous figure a stark contrast to the swirling opulence around him. His gray eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the crowd, noting every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift in posture that might betray a secret. The trap he had set in the previous hours weighed heavily on his mind. He had spread a carefully crafted rumor through the manor staff, a whisper that a witness had seen the killer tampering with the champagne flute that had ended Dubois' life. The lie was designed to provoke a reaction, to flush out the guilty party like a startled pheasant from the brush. Now, as the orchestra struck up a lively waltz, Poirot waited, his senses attuned to the slightest ripple in the sea of revelry. The guests moved in elegant pairs, their masks glinting with gold and feathers, their laughter tinged with an edge of nervousness. Among them, Poirot's gaze lingered on Clara Duval, a young woman whose delicate frame and auburn curls made her stand out, even in the anonymity of the masquerade. Her mask, a filigree of silver leaves, did little to hide the tension in her eyes as she glided across the floor with a minor noble whose name Poirot had yet to learn. Clara had been on his list of suspects since he'd overheard her heated exchange with Victor Crane. the disgraced composer, in a shadowed alcove earlier that evening. Their words had been too hushed to discern, but the intensity of their gestures suggested a connection far deeper than mere acquaintance. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the approach of Lord Reginald Ashburn, the host of this fateful ball. The man's tall, imposing figure was clad in a velvet doublet of midnight blue, his mask a starred black domino that gave him the air of a predatory bird. "Monsieur Poirot," Ashburn said, his voice smooth but laced with a trace of impatience, "I trust you're enjoying the festivities? Or are you too consumed by your inquiries to partake?" Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching in a faint smile. "The festivities, Lord Ashburn, are most splendid, but the mind of Hercule Poirot, it does not rest when there is a puzzle to be solved. The death of Monsieur Du Bois demands my full attention." Ashburn's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "I understand your zeal, but I must insist you conduct your investigation discreetly. My guests are already on edge. Another scandal could ruin the evening entirely. Ruin, perhaps." Poirot replied, his tone mild but unyielding. "But the truth, it has a way of restoring order. No, I assure you, I shall be as discreet as the shadows themselves." Ashburn gave a curt nod and moved away, his broad shoulders cutting through the crowd like a ship through waves. Poirot watched him go, noting the way the lord's hand lingered near his cane, he recalled, adorned with a silver insignia that had yet to be explained. The seed of suspicion planted in Poirot's mind grew a little stronger. As the waltz ended and the guests dispersed to refresh their drinks or exchange whispered gossip, Poirot made his way toward the refreshment table, where Clara Duval stood alone, fanning herself with a delicate ivory fan. Her posture was rigid, her eyes darting nervously toward the ballroom's grand staircase, as though she expected someone or something to descend at any moment. "Mademoiselle Duval," Poirot said, approaching with his characteristic measured step, "may I have the pleasure of a moment of your time?" Clara started, her fan pausing mid-motion. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice a touch too bright, "of course, though I confess, I'm rather overwhelmed by the evening's excitement." "Excitement, oui," Poirot said, his eyes locking onto hers. "And yet, I sense in you a certain unease. Perhaps it is the tragedy of Monsieur Du Bois that troubles you." Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then, with a forced laugh, she said, "Who wouldn't be troubled? A man dead, poisoned. In the midst of such a grand affair, it's dreadful." "Dreadful, indeed," Poirot agreed. "And yet, I wonder if there is more to your distress. A conversation, perhaps, with Monsieur Victor Crane? I could not help but notice your discussion earlier. It seemed most animated." Clara's fan snapped shut, and for a moment Poirot thought she might bolt, but she recovered quickly, her expression hardening. "You're mistaken, Monsieur Poirot. Victor and I are old acquaintances, nothing more. We were merely catching up, acquaintances." Poirot mused, tilting his head. "And yet, the heart, it has a way of complicating such matters. No, tell me, mademoiselle, what is your connection to the late Monsieur Du Bois?" Clara's eyes widened, and Poirot saw the flicker of fear he had been waiting for. "I barely knew him," she stammered. "We exchanged pleasantries once or twice, nothing more." Poirot nodded, as though satisfied, but his mind was already cataloging her reaction. Before he could press further, a commotion at the far end of the ballroom drew his attention. A young footman, his face pale as chalk, was shouting something about a carriage waiting outside. Clara seized the opportunity, murmuring an excuse and slipping into the crowd. Poirot's instinct screamed that she was hiding something, and he resolved to follow her. But first, he needed to investigate the source of the disturbance. He moved swiftly through the throng, his small stature allowing him to weave between guests with ease. At the ballroom's entrance, he found the footman, now surrounded by a small knot of curious onlookers. "What is this uproar?" Poirot demanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs. The footman, barely more than a boy, looked at him with wide eyes. "It's Mademoiselle Duval, sir. She's trying to leave. She ordered a carriage. Said she had to go at once." Poirot's heart quickened. His trap had worked sooner than he'd expected. "Where is she now?" he asked, already moving toward the grand doors. "Outside, sir, by the fountain." Poirot hurried through the manor's entrance hall, his patent leather shoes clicking against the marble. The cool night air hit him as he stepped onto the gravel drive, where a fountain bubbled under the moonlight. There, standing beside a waiting carriage, was Clara Duval, her mask discarded, her face a mask of panic. A small valise lay at her feet, and she was arguing with a coachman who seemed reluctant to depart. "Mademoiselle Duval," Poirot called, his voice sharp but calm. "A sudden departure, is it not? May I inquire as to the cause?" Clara froze, her hands clutching the edges of her cloak. For a moment, Poirot thought she might run, but the weight of his gaze seemed to pin her in place. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, I can't stay here. It's too dangerous." "Dangerous, Poirot said, stepping closer. "But to flee in the night, it suggests a guilt most profound. Tell me, mademoiselle, what do you know of the smuggling ring that Monsieur Dubois was investigating?" Clara's gasp was audible, and her knees buckled slightly. The coachman, sensing the gravity of the moment, backed away, leaving them alone by the fountain. Poirot waited, his expression one of patient expectation, though his mind was racing with possibilities. "I didn't kill him," Clara whispered at last, her voice breaking. "I swear it, Monsieur Poirot, but I knew about the smuggling. I had no choice." "No choice," Poirot repeated, his tone gentle but probing. "Explain, if you please." Clara sank onto the edge of the fountain, her hands twisting in her lap. "It started months ago," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. Victor Crane, he was in debt, terrible debt. He'd lost everything after his last opera failed. A man approached him, offered him money to look the other way while certain packages moved through the city, jewels, mostly, hidden in shipments of wine or fabric. Victor didn't want to do it, but he was desperate, and I loved him. I helped him, just once or twice, to keep him safe. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And Monsieur Dubois, what was his role?" "He was getting too close," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'd been asking questions, poking into Victor's affairs. I overheard him talking to Lord Ashburn about a stolen artifact, something tied to the smuggling. I told Victor, and he panicked. But I swear, neither of us killed him." Poirot studied her, his mind sifting through her words. Her confession rang true, but it was incomplete. "And yet, mademoiselle, you flee. Why now?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Because of your rumor," she admitted. "I heard the servants talking about a witness. I thought they meant me. I couldn't stay. Not if someone knew." Poirot's mustache twitched in satisfaction. The trap had indeed worked. Though not quite as he'd planned, Clara's fear had driven her to reveal her involvement, but her denial of the murder felt genuine. Still, there was more to uncover. He was about to question her further when a glint of metal caught his eye, half buried in the gravel near her valise. He bent down, careful not to alarm her, and retrieved a small locket, its surface etched with a curious insignia, a serpent coiled around a dagger. "This is yours, mademoiselle?" he asked. Holding it up, Clara's face drained of color. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I've never seen it before." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Curious," he said, slipping the locket into his pocket. "We shall discuss this further, I think. But for now, you will return to the manor with me. To flee is to invite suspicion, and Hercule Poirot, he does not believe you are the killer." "Not yet." Clara hesitated, then nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. As they walked back toward the manor, Poirot's mind was already turning to Victor Crane. Clara's confession had painted him as a desperate man, caught in a web of crime and coercion. But was he a murderer? And what of the locket, with its enigmatic insignia? Poirot's fingers brushed the metal in his pocket, and a sudden memory stirred a glimpse of a similar design earlier that evening. On the head of Lord Ashburn's cane, the ballroom was as lively as ever when they re-entered, though Poirot's sharp eyes caught the subtle glances cast their way. Clara's brief absence had not gone unnoticed. He escorted her to a quiet corner, where a maid was instructed to keep an eye on her, then made his way toward the orchestra, where Victor Crane stood, his mask pushed up onto his forehead, his face etched with exhaustion. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot said, his voice low but commanding. "A word, if you please." Crane's eyes flicked toward Clara, then back to Poirot. "What is this about?" he asked, his tone wary. "It is about secrets," Poirot said, "and the price they exact. Mademoiselle Duval has shared with me a most interesting tale of debts, of smuggling, of a man driven to desperation. I wonder, monsieur, what you might add to this story." Crane's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Poirot thought he might deny everything. But then, with a heavy sigh, he said, "She told you, didn't she, about the jewels?" Poirot nodded. "She did. And now, I ask you to be truthful. What is your connection to Monsieur Dubois' death?" "I didn't kill him," Crane said, fiercely. "I swear it. Yes, I was involved in the smuggling. It was the only way to keep my creditors at bay. But Dubois, he was a threat, not just to me, but to everyone involved. Someone else took care of him. Someone with more to lose. Someone like Lord Ashburn?" Poirot asked, watching Crane's reaction closely. Crane hesitated, his eyes darting toward the host, who was now holding court near the center of the ballroom. I don't know," he said at last. "But there's more to this than you realize, Poirot. The smuggling, it's not just jewels. There's something bigger, something dangerous. And I'm in too deep to get out." Poirot's mind raced. Crane's words hinted at a conspiracy far larger than he'd suspected, one that reached beyond the walls of Blackwood Manor. But before he could press further, a scream pierced the air, coming from the direction of the grand staircase. The music faltered, and the guests turned as one, their masks unable to hide their shock. Poirot moved quickly, his heart pounding. At the base of the staircase lay a woman, her mask askew, her eyes wide with terror. It was Lady Beatrice, the cunning heiress whose rivalry with Crane had caught Poirot's attention earlier. In her hand, clutched tightly, was a crumpled note, and on her wrist, a faint trace of the same perfume Poirot had detected on both victims. "She is alive," someone called, as a guest knelt beside her. "But she's been attacked." Poirot knelt beside Lady Beatrice, his fingers gently prying the note from her grasp. The words scrawled across it were brief but chilling. "You know too much. Silence or death." His eyes flicked to the locket in his pocket, then to Clara and Crane, who stood frozen in the crowd. The insignia on the locket, he realized, matched the one on Lord Ashburn's cane, a serpent and dagger, a symbol of treachery. As the guests erupted into panicked whispers, Poirot rose, his mind a whirlwind of connections. Clara's confession, Crane's desperation, Lady Beatrice's attack, and the insignia that tied them all to Lord Ashburn. The dance of deception was far from over, but Hercule Poirot was determined to lead it to its final, unmasking step. Night wore on, and Poirot's investigation deepened. He questioned Lady Beatrice, now recovering in a private parlor, her composure shaken, but her wit intact. She admitted to suspecting the smuggling ring, but denied knowing its full extent. The note, she claimed, had been slipped into her glove during a dance, though she couldn't say by whom. Poirot noted the fear in her eyes, a fear that went beyond the attack itself. Returning to the ballroom, Poirot sought out Lord Ashburn, determined to confront him about the insignia. But the host was nowhere to be found. A discreet inquiry revealed that he had retired to his study, claiming a headache. Poirot's suspicions flared. He made his way through the manor's labyrinthine corridors, his steps silent on the plush carpets, until he reached the heavy oak door of Ashburn's study. He knocked once, then entered without waiting for a reply. Ashburn stood by a roaring fire, his cane in hand, his mask discarded. The insignia gleamed in the firelight, and Poirot felt a surge of certainty. "Lord Ashburn," he said, his voice steady, "it is time, I think, for the truth. This insignia, the serpent and dagger, it is no mere decoration, is it?" Ashburn's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment there was only silence. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he set his cane on the desk. "You're a clever man, Poirot," he said, "cleverer than I'd hoped. But you're meddling in affairs you don't understand." "Then enlighten me," Poirot said, undaunted. "What is the meaning of this symbol? And what is your role in the smuggling ring that has claimed to lives?" Ashburn's laugh was bitter. "You think it's so simple? A few stolen jewels, a poisoned glass, you're chasing shadows, Poirot. The serpent and dagger. It's a mark of loyalty, of power. But not mine. I'm merely a pawn, as are Crane and Duval. The true master of this game is far beyond your reach." Poirot's heart sank, but his resolve did not waver. "A pawn, perhaps," he said, "but a pawn who knows more than he admits. Tell me, Lord Ashburn, who is this master? And why does their insignia appear on a locket dropped by Mademoiselle Duval?" Ashburn's eyes widened, and Poirot saw the first crack in his composure. "A locket," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "Where did you find it?" "By the fountain," Poirot said, watching him closely, "where Mademoiselle Duval intended to flee. It seems, Lord Ashburn, that your game is unraveling." Before Ashburn could respond, a crash sounded from the hallway, followed by a shout. Poirot turned, his instincts urging him to investigate, but when he looked back, Ashburn was gone, the study's secret panels sliding shut behind him. Poirot cursed under his breath, realizing he'd been outmaneuvered. The secret passage he discovered earlier must connect to this room, offering Ashburn an escape. Poirot hurried into the hallway, where a group of guests had gathered around a shattered vase. A maid was apologizing profusely, claiming she'd tripped. Poirot's eyes scanned the crowd, but Ashburn was nowhere to be seen. His mind raced, piecing together the night's events. Clara's confession, Crane's desperation, Lady Beatrice's attack, and now Ashburn's flight, all linked by the serpent and dagger, a symbol of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond Blackwood Manor. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot returned to the ballroom. His resolve hardened. The dance of deception had taken a dangerous turn. But Hercule Poirot was not one to falter. He would follow the trail of the serpent and dagger, unmask the true master of this deadly game, and bring justice to the shadows of Blackwood Manor. Chapter 6. The Midnight Confrontation. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand library of Blackwood Manor, his small, precise frame dwarfed by the towering bookshelves that lined the walls. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and polished wood, a testament to the manor's centuries-old legacy. Moonlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, casting long shadows across the room, where the flickering flames of a chandelier fought against the encroaching darkness. The masquerade ball continued in the ballroom, its music a distant hum. But here, in this secluded chamber, Poirot's mind was a whirl of deductions, each clue a thread in the tapestry of murder he was determined to unravel. The events of the evening weighed heavily on him. Clara Duval's detention had been a triumph, yet it felt incomplete, like a melody cut off mid-note. Her confession about the smuggling ring had illuminated one corner of the mystery, but the murders of the poisoned diplomat, Monsieur Dubois, and the strangled footman remained shrouded in shadow. The locket with its enigmatic insignia, matching the one on Lord Ashburn's cane, had set Poirot's instincts ablaze. It was a connection too precise to be coincidence, and Poirot, with his unerring sense for the truth, knew that Lord Ashburn held secrets that could unlock the case. He adjusted his bow tie, his fingers brushing the crisp fabric of his evening suit, and paced the room. His polished shoes clicked softly against the parquet floor, a rhythmic counterpoint to the chaos of his thoughts. The library was a labyrinth of knowledge, its shelves brimming with tomes on history, art, and philosophy. But Poirot sought answers, not in books but in the human heart where greed, fear, and betrayal so often resided. Mon ami, he murmured to himself, his Belgian accent softening the words. The truth is here, in the shadows of this manor. But it is a clever truth, one that hides behind the mass of men. The door creaked open, and Lord Reginald Ashburn entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, and his eyes, sharp and guarded, met Poirot's with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He wore a tailored black suit, the insignia on his cane catching the light as he leaned on it lightly, as if it were an extension of his authority. "Monsieur Poirot," Ashburn said, his voice smooth but tinged with unease, "you requested my presence. I trust this is urgent, given the hour." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly as he offered a polite smile. "Urgent, yes, milord. The matter of murder is always urgent, is it not? And I believe you may hold the key to certain irregularities that have come to my attention." Ashburn's brow furrowed, but he maintained his composure, settling into a high-backed chair near the fireplace. "Irregularities, I assure you. I have nothing to hide. This manor has hosted many a grand event, but murder, it is a stain I would not willingly bear." Poirot's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who saw through facades, as easily as one might see through glass. "And yet, milord, the locket found in Mademoiselle Duval's possession bears an insignia identical to that on your cane. A curious coincidence, n'est-ce pas? I wonder what such a symbol signifies in the context of a smuggling ring and to murders." Ashburn's fingers tightened around the head of his cane, the knuckles whitening briefly before he relaxed his grip. "A coincidence, indeed," he said, his tone measured. "The insignia is an old family crest, used by many in my circle. Over the years, it proves nothing." Poirot raised a finger, his gesture commanding silence. None, milord. Nothing is proven, but much is suggested. The smuggling of jewels, the secret passage behind the ballroom tapestry, the deaths of Monsieur Dubois and the footman, all are threads in a web, and I, Hercule Poirot, will follow them to their center. Tell me, what do you know of this smuggling ring?" Ashburn's eyes darted to the fire, where flames danced over logs, casting flickering shadows on his face. For a moment, he seemed to weigh his words, as if balancing on the edge of a precipice. Then, with a sigh, he leaned forward, his voice low. "Very well, Poirot, I will speak plainly. But you must understand the delicacy of my position. Blackwood Manor has long been a hub for certain discreet transactions, jewels, art, antiquities, items of value that pass through hands that prefer anonymity. I have funded such ventures, yes, but only as a silent partner. I had no knowledge of murder, nor would I condone it." Poirot's gaze remained steady, his mind cataloging every nuance of Ashburn's demeanor, the slight tremor in his voice, the way his eyes avoided direct contact. "A silent partner," Poirot repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. "And yet, milord, the locket suggests a connection to Mademoiselle Duval, who knew of the smuggling, and the insignia on your cane places you at the heart of this affair. Tell me, who else is involved? Who pulls the strings of this operation?" Before Ashburn could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the far end of the library. Poirot's head snapped toward the sound, his senses alert. The heavy velvet curtains near the window swayed, as if disturbed by a sudden draft. In an instant, Poirot was on his feet, moving with surprising agility for a man of his stature. He crossed the room, his eyes scanning the shadows, and parted the curtains to reveal a narrow door, partially ajar, hidden in the paneling. A secret passage, perhaps, Poirot mused aloud, his voice calm, but edged with excitement. "Or a careless intruder." Ashburn rose, his expression a mix of alarm and indignation. "This is preposterous. The door leads to a storage closet, nothing more." Poirot ignored him, pushing the door open to reveal a cramped space filled with crates and dust-covered shelves. The air was stale, and a faint metallic scent lingered. Poirot's keen eyes caught a glint on the floor, a shard of glass, its edge stained with a dark residue. He crouched, careful not to touch it, and examined it closely. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "This is no ordinary glass. It is from a champagne flute, perhaps the very one that carried the poison to Monsieur Dubois. And here, in this hidden nook, it suggests a deliberate act of concealment." Ashburn's face paled, but before he could speak, a new sound pierced the silence, a crackling. Like the snap of dry twigs underfoot, Poirot's head whipped around, and his eyes widened as he saw tendrils of smoke curling from beneath the library door. The acrid scent of burning wood filled the air, and the distant hum of the ball was drowned out by the growing roar of flames. "Fire!" Ashburn shouted, his composure crumbling. "We must get out." Poirot's mind raced, his thoughts as precise as clockwork. A fire in the library, at this precise moment, was no accident. It was a calculated move, designed to destroy evidence or, perhaps, to silence those who sought it. He grabbed Ashburn's arm, pulling him toward the door. But his eyes remained fixed on the crates in the closet. One, partially open, revealed a glimpse of papers and a leather-bound ledger. "None, milord," Poirot said, his voice firm despite the rising heat. "We will not flee until we secure what the arsonist seeks to destroy." With a swift motion, he darted to the crate, seizing the ledger and tucking it under his arm. The smoke thickened, stinging his eyes, but Poirot's resolve was unshakable. He led Ashburn to the door, where the heat was already intense, and pushed it open, revealing a corridor engulfed in flames. The fire had spread from the library's entrance, licking at the walls and devouring the ornate tapestries. "Vite, vite," Poirot urged, guiding Ashburn toward a side passage he had noted earlier during his exploration of the manor. The ledger was heavy in his hands, its pages promising answers. But survival was now the priority. The pair navigated through the smoke, coughing as the air grew hotter, until they emerged into a service corridor, where the flames had not yet reached. Gasping for breath, Poirot leaned against the wall, his suit smudged with soot, but his mind as clear as ever. Ashburn, disheveled and shaken, stared at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "You are a madman, Poirot," he said, his voice hoarse. "Risking our lives for a book, not a book." "Milord," Poirot corrected, holding up the singed ledger. "Evidence, the truth that someone wishes to burn away. And I, Hercule Poirot, will not allow it to be lost." The distant sound of shouts and footsteps indicated that the manor staff and guests were responding to the fire. Poirot opened the ledger, its pages brittle but intact, and scanned the entries. It was written in a meticulous hand, detailing transactions, dates, amounts, and cryptic initials. One entry caught his eye, a shipment of jewels, marked with the same insignia as the locket and Ashburn's cane, and a name, the Phantom. "The Phantom," Poirot whispered, his eyes narrowing. "A name, or a title, a shadow that moves. Among us, perhaps even now." Ashburn's face hardened, but he said nothing. Poirot closed the ledger, tucking it inside his coat. "We will speak more, milord. But first, we must ensure the safety of this manor and its secrets." The fire was contained within the hour, thanks to the efforts of the manor staff and the local fire brigade, who arrived with buckets and hoses. The library, however, was a ruin, its shelves reduced to charred skeletons, its books turned to ash. Poirot stood amidst the wreckage, his expression somber but resolute. The ledger, now safely hidden in his quarters, was a beacon of hope in the darkness of the investigation. He gathered the guests in the ballroom, where the masquerade had come to an abrupt halt. Their masks, once symbols of revelry, now seemed to mock the tragedy that had unfolded. Poirot's voice, clear and commanding, cut through the murmurs of fear and confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his accent lending an air of authority. "Tonight, a fire sought to erase the truth, but it has failed. The murders of Monsieur Dubois and the footman, the smuggling ring, the secrets of Blackwood Manor, they are all connected. And the first, Hercule Poirot, vowed to protect the evidence that remains at all costs." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale beneath their masks. Clara Duval, still shaken from her earlier detention, stood near the back, her eyes fixed on Poirot. Victor Crane, the composer, fidgeted nervously, his fingers tapping a silent rhythm. Lady Beatrice, her composure restored, watched Poirot with a calculating gaze, and Lord Ashburn, standing apart, clutched his cane as if it were a lifeline. Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the puzzle. The ledger hinted at a traitor among the guests, someone who had betrayed the smuggling ring's trust. The fire was no accident, it was a desperate act to destroy the evidence Poirot had uncovered. But who had set it, and who was the phantom? The figure whose name appeared in the ledger's cryptic entries as the guests dispersed. Poirot lingered, his eyes scanning the room. The ballroom, with its gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers, seemed to mock the darkness that had infiltrated the manor. He thought of the locket, the insignia, the secret passage, and now the ledger. Each clue was a step closer to the truth. But the path was fraught with danger. He retired to his quarters, the ledger hidden beneath a loose floorboard, as he sat at the small desk, his fingers tracing the insignia on the locket. He felt a surge of determination. The fire had been a setback, but it had also revealed the desperation of the culprit. They were close, and they were afraid. The phantom, Poirot murmured, his voice a whisper in the quiet room. "You cannot hide forever. The little gray cells of Hercule Poirot will find you, and the dance of deception will end." The night stretched on, the manor settling into an uneasy silence. But for Poirot, sleep was a luxury he could not afford. The ledger, the fire, the insignia, they were pieces of a puzzle that demanded his attention. And as the stars glittered outside, he began to read, his mind a beacon in the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth before the next deadly move, the ledger's entries were meticulous, detailing shipments of jewels and antiquities across borders, with initials that Poirot suspected represented key players in the smuggling ring. One entry, dated only a week before the ball, listed a transaction involving a rare sapphire, marked with the initials LB, Lady Beatrice, perhaps, or another figure yet to be revealed. The name the Phantom appeared repeatedly, always in connection with the largest transactions, suggesting a leader who operated from the shadows. Poirot's thoughts turned to the fire. It had started in the library, where the ledger was hidden. But how had the arsonist known to target it? Someone must have seen him enter the closet. Or perhaps they had been watching the library, waiting for the moment to strike. The glass shard, stained with poison, was another clue, a remnant of the murder weapon, discarded in haste. But why leave it in the closet? Was it an oversight or a deliberate misdirection? He rose, pacing the room, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The secret passage behind the ballroom tapestry, the locket, the ledger, the fire, all were connected, but the link was elusive. He needed more information, more time. But time, he knew, was a luxury the killer would not grant him. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Clara Duval, her face pale but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "I must speak with you. There is something I did not tell you earlier, something about Victor Crane." Poirot gestured for her to enter, his eyes sharp with interest. "Speak, mademoiselle. Every detail, however small, may be the key to this mystery." Clara sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Victor, he was not entirely honest with you. He told me, before the ball, that he had been approached by someone, a man he called the Phantom. They offered him a chance to clear his debts, but only if he helped move certain items through the manor. He refused, or so he said. But I saw him speaking with a man in a black mask the night of the ball. I think he lied to me and to you. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his growing excitement. A man in a black mask, you say? And when was this? Just before the first murder, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw them near the ballroom, in the shadows. Victor looked frightened, but he didn't tell me why. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Victor Crane, the disgraced composer, had been a suspect from the start. His nervous demeanor and connection to Clara marking him as a person of interest. Now, this new information suggested he was more deeply involved than Poirot had realized. Was he the phantom, or merely a pawn in a larger game? Thank you, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. You have done well to tell me this. Now, you must rest, and trust that I, Hercule Poirot, will bring this matter to its conclusion. Clara nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope, and left the room. Poirot returned to the ledger, his fingers tracing the entries, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Victor Crane, Lord Ashburn, Lady Beatrice. The phantom each was a player in this deadly dance, and Poirot was determined to lead them to the final bow. The hours passed, the manor quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood. Poirot worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the ledger's entries with his notes from the investigation. The initials LB appeared again, linked to a shipment of antiquities that had passed through Blackwood Manor only days before the ball. Another set of initials, VC, caught his eye. Victor Crane. Perhaps. The web was tightening, but the center remained a elusive dot as dawn approached. Poirot closed the ledger, his eyes burning with fatigue, but his resolve unshaken. The fire had been a setback, but it had also revealed the killer's desperation. The ledger was safe, and with it, Poirot held the key to unmasking the phantom. He would need to act quickly, before the killer struck again. He stood, stretching his cramped limbs, and gazed out the window at the first light of morning. The manor, with its secrets and shadows, seemed to watch him in return, its walls holding the truth he sought. The phantom, he said softly, your time is running out. The little gray cells of Hercule Poirot are never defeated. With that, he prepared for the day ahead, knowing that the next move in this deadly game would be his. The ledger, the locket, the fire, they were all pieces of a puzzle that only he could solve. And solve it he would, for justice, for truth, and for the memory of those who had fallen in this masquerade of death. Chapter 7. The mass Traitorth grand chandelier of Blackwood Manor cast a shimmering glow over the ballroom, its myriad crystals refracting light into fleeting rainbows that danced across the polished marble floor. The masquerade had resumed, after the chaos of the library fire, but the atmosphere was taut. The laughter of the guests now tinged with unease. Hercule Poirot stood near a towering gilt-framed mirror, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. His small, precise frame was immaculate in a tailored black suit, his own mask a simple silver affair resting lightly on his face, leaving his piercing gaze unobstructed. The singed ledger, now safely tucked into his inner pocket, weighed heavily on his mind. Its cryptic entries had revealed a coded message, one that pointed to a traitor among the guests, and Poirot was determined to unmask them before the night was out. The music swelled, a lilting waltz that seemed almost mocking in its elegance, given the dark undercurrents swirling through the manor. Poirot's thoughts were a whirlwind of connections, each clue a thread in the tapestry of deception he was unraveling. The ledger's code had been a simple substitution cipher, one he had cracked in the quiet hours after the fire. The name it revealed, Lady Beatrice, had sent a jolt through him, not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed a suspicion he had harbored since the second murder. Her poised demeanor, her carefully crafted alibis, and her subtle influence over the other guests had marked her as a figure of interest. Yet, Poirot knew that accusations without evidence were mere conjecture, and he prided himself on precision. He moved through the crowd, his steps measured, his expression one of polite curiosity. The guests, still reeling from the fire and the mounting body count, whispered behind their fans and masks, their eyes darting nervously. Poirot noted the absence of Clara Duval, who had been detained after her failed attempt to flee the manor. Her confession about the smuggling ring had been illuminating, but it was her locket bearing the same insignia as Lord Ashburn's cane that had set his mind racing. The connection between the smuggling operation and the murders was clear, but the scope of the conspiracy remained elusive. Lady Beatrice, he suspected, was not the mastermind, but a key player, a traitor who had betrayed her own allies to protect her interests. As he approached the refreshment table, Poirot's gaze fell on Lady Beatrice herself. She stood near a towering ice sculpture of a swan, her emerald green gown shimmering under the chandelier's light. Her mask, adorned with peacock feathers, framed her sharp, aristocratic features, and her smile was a practiced masterpiece of charm. She was engaged in conversation with a young viscount, her laughter light but her eyes calculating. Poirot observed the way her fingers tightened around her champagne flute, a subtle tell of her unease. He approached, his own smile disarming. "Madam," he said, bowing slightly, "you seem to be enjoying the evening despite its unfortunate events." Lady Beatrice turned to him, her expression unruffled. "Monsieur Poirot, you are ever the observer." "Yes, one must find joy where one can, even in such trying times. Tell me, have you made progress in your little investigation?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of amusement. "Little, you say? The matters of life and death are never little, Lady Beatrice, but I assure you, I am close to the truth, very close." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "How fascinating." "Do share, monsieur. I am all ears." "In due time," Poirot replied, his tone light, but his eyes locked on hers. "The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, like a dancer stepping into the spotlight." He excused himself, leaving her with a polite nod, but not before noting the slight tremor in her hand as she raised her glass. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Poirot knew it would bear fruit. He made his way to Lord Ashburn, who stood near the orchestra, his cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. The lord's face was pale, his eyes haunted by the events of the past hours. The fire had shaken him, and Poirot suspected it was not merely the loss of his library that troubled him. Lord Ashburn, Poirot said, his voice low, "A word, if you please." The lord turned, his expression guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are not here to accuse me further. I have told you all I know about the smuggling." "And yet," Poirot said, tilting his head, "there are gaps in your story, gaps that the ledger may yet fill. Tell me, what do you know of Lady Beatrice's dealings?" Ashburn's eyes widened, but he quickly masked his surprise. "Lady Beatrice, she is a guest, a respected member of society. Surely you do not suspect her." "I suspect everyone, monsieur," Poirot said, his tone mild but firm. "It is my method, the ledger. It speaks of a traitor, one who is betrayed. The smuggling ring. I believe Lady Beatrice knows more than she lets on." Ashburn hesitated, his grip tightening on his cane. "I cannot say. My dealings were with intermediaries, never directly with her." "But she is ambitious?" Poirot. "Ambitious and ruthless?" Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "Merci, Lord Ashburn. Your candor is appreciated." As the night wore on, Poirot's plan took shape. He needed to confront Lady Beatrice, but not in private. A public unmasking would force her to react, to reveal her true nature. He enlisted the help of the manor staff, instructing them to spread a rumor that a new witness had come forward, one who could identify the killer. The rumor spread like wildfire, and Poirot watched as the guests' whispers grew more frantic, their masks no longer sufficient to hide their fear. By midnight, The tension in the ballroom was palpable. Poirot took his place near the grand staircase, his voice carrying over the crowd as he called for silence. The orchestra stopped, and all eyes turned to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his accent precise, "tonight we have danced not only to music but to the tune of deception. 2 lives have been taken, and a traitor walks among us. I, Hercule Poirot, have uncovered the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Poirot's gaze fixed on Lady Beatrice. She stood near the center of the room, her posture rigid, her eyes darting to the exits. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "The ledger, saved from the flames, revealed a coded message. It named the traitor who orchestrated the murders of Monsieur Dubois and the footman. That traitor is none other than Lady Beatrice." The crowd gasped, and Lady Beatrice's face drained of color. She stepped forward, her voice sharp. "This is preposterous. You have no proof, Monsieur Poirot." "Oh, but I do," Poirot said, producing the singed ledger from his pocket. "This document, combined with the testimony of Mademoiselle Duval and the insignia on your locket, paints a clear picture. You ordered the murderers to conceal your role in the smuggling ring, did you not?" Lady Beatrice's composure cracked, her eyes blazing. "You dare accuse me? I am a lady of standing, not some common criminal." "Then explain the locket," Poirot pressed, holding up the small, ornate object he had recovered from Clara. "It bears the same insignia as Lord Ashburn's cane, a symbol tied to the smuggling operation, and the ledger its code names. You as the one who betrayed your partners to protect your wealth." The crowd parted, leaving Lady Beatrice exposed. She clutched her fan, her knuckles white. "This is absurd. I will not stand here and be slandered." "Then perhaps," Poirot said, his voice cutting through her protest, "you will explain why you attempted to bribe a witness this very evening." "Yes, I know of your offer to silence the so-called witness, a trap I set to test your guilt." Lady Beatrice froze, her breath hitching. The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words hanging in the air. Then, with a sudden movement, she lunged toward the nearest door, her heels clicking frantically against the marble. But Poirot had anticipated this. Two footmen, stationed at his request, blocked her path, and she stumbled, her mask falling to the floor. "Enough," she cried, her voice breaking. "Yes, I was involved, but I did not kill them. I only wanted to protect my name, my fortune. The murders were necessary." The admission sent a shockwave through the crowd. Poirot stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. "Necessary, madam? Murder is never necessary. You betrayed your allies, orchestrated the deaths, and thought you could dance away from justice. But justice, it always finds its mark." As the footman restrained her, Lady Beatrice's defiance crumbled. She was led away, her head bowed, her once proud demeanor shattered. The guests erupted into whispers. But Poirot's work was not done. As he watched her disappear into the custody of the local constabulary, a nagging doubt lingered. Lady Beatrice was guilty, yes, but her desperation suggested she was not the mastermind. Someone else, someone more cunning, was pulling the strings. Poirot returned to his room, the ledger still in his possession. He sat at the small desk, the lamplight casting shadows across his face. The insignia, the smuggling ring, the murders all pointed to a larger conspiracy, one that extended beyond Blackwood Manor. He opened the ledger again, his fingers tracing the singed pages. A single word, buried in the code, caught his eye. Phantom. It was a name, a shadow that had hovered over the case from the beginning. Lady Beatrice had been a pawn, but the true puppeteer remained at large. Poirot leaned back, his mind racing. The night was not over, and neither was the dance. The phantom, whoever they were, would not escape him. He closed the ledger, his resolve unshaken. The masquerade had unmasked one traitor, but the final act was yet to come. The ballroom's music resumed, a softer melody now, as if mourning the loss of innocence. Poirot stood, adjusting his tie, and stepped back into the fray. The guests, unaware of the deeper threat, continued their dance, their masks hiding their fears. But Poirot saw through them all. The phantom was here, watching, waiting, and Hercule Poirot would be ready when they made their move. The hours passed, and Poirot moved through the manor, his senses attuned to every detail. He spoke with the remaining guests, probing their stories, searching for the telltale signs of deception. Victor Crane, the disgraced composer, was subdued, his eyes haunted by Clara's arrest. Lord Ashburn avoided Poirot's gaze, his cane tapping nervously. Even the staff, shaken by the events, whispered of strange occurrences of figures seen. In the shadows, a door left ajar. Poirot catalogued each detail, his mind a steel trap out by dawn. The masquerade was winding down, the guests retiring to their rooms. Poirot stood alone in the ballroom, the chandelier dimming as the first light of morning crept through the windows. He felt the weight of the case, the lives lost, the secrets uncovered. Lady Beatrice's arrest was a victory, but it was incomplete. The phantom, the true orchestrator, was still out there, their identity hidden behind a mask Poirot had yet to remove. He returned to his room, the ledger under his arm, and began to plan. The next move would be his boldest yet a trap to lure the phantom into the open. It would require cunning, patience, and a touch of theatrics. Poirot smiled faintly, his mustache curling. The dance was not over, and he, Hercule Poirot, would lead the final steps. The manor settled into an uneasy silence, the echoes of the waltz fading into the walls. Poirot sat at his desk, pen in hand, sketching out his strategy. The phantom would not expect him to strike so soon, to turn their own game against them. He would stage a spectacle, a moment of truth that would force the mastermind to reveal themselves. The ledger, the locket, the insignia all were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to one final confrontation. As the sun rose over Blackwood Manor, Poirot's resolve hardened. The traitor had been unmasked, but the true villain remained. He would find them, no matter the cost. The masquerade was a deadly dance, but Hercule Poirot was a master of its steps, and he would not falter until the music stopped. Chapter 8. The puppeteer stringed grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor, though still resplendent with its crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors, seemed to hum with a different energy now a taut, electric tension that vibrated beneath the surface of the revelry. The masquerade had resumed after the chaos of the library fire, as if Lord Ashburn's insistence on normalcy could erase the stain of murder and betrayal. Guests swirled across the polished floor, their masks gleaming in the candle light. But Hercule Poirot stood apart, his keen eyes scanning the crowd. His mind, as always, worked like a finely tuned machine, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that had grown more intricate with each passing. The singed ledger he had saved from the flames lay hidden in his suite, its cryptic entries a map to the truth he sought. The ledger had revealed a coded message, one that pointed to Lady Beatrice's involvement in the smuggling ring. But Poirot's instincts told him the web extended further, its threads woven by a hand far more cunning than hers. The name, the phantom, had surfaced in Victor Crane's trembling confession, a shadowy figure, pulling the strings of this deadly dance. Poirot's task now was to lure this mastermind into the open, and he had devised a plan as bold as it was perilous, a stage death. A trap to force the phantom's hand. Poirot adjusted his bow tie, the crisp black fabric a stark contrast to the flamboyant costumes around him. His own mask, a simple silver affair, concealed little of his sharp features, for he preferred to hide in plain sight. He moved through the crowd, his small, precise steps carrying him toward the grand staircase where Lord Ashburn held court. Surrounded by admirers, the host's cane, with its distinctive insignia, caught the candle light, and Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. The cane had been a clue, a thread connecting Ashburn to the smuggling operation. But it was not the final piece of the puzzle. Lord Ashburn, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the chatter with polite authority. A word, if you please. Ashburn turned, his mask a grotesque parody of a lion's face, its golden mane curling around his sharp cheekbones. Monsieur Poirot, always a pleasure. Have you come to join the dance, or do you still chase shadows? Poirot's smile was inscrutable. The shadows, mon ami, are often where the truth resides. I wish to discuss the ledger privately. Ashburn's eyes flickered, but he gestured toward a side corridor with a practiced ease. Of course. Let us step away from the noise. They moved to a small antechamber, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Poirot closed the door behind them, the click of the latch loud in the sudden quiet. The ledger you so carelessly allowed to burn, he began, contained information most illuminating. It spoke of payments, coded names, and a figure known only as the Phantom. I believe you know more than you have shared. Ashburn's posture stiffened, his fingers tightening around the head of his cane. You overstep, Poirot. I admitted to funding certain ventures, but I am no murderer. This phantom you speak of is a ghost, a fiction created by desperate men. Desperate men, perhaps. Poirot replied, his voice soft but unyielding. But ghosts do not leave gloves behind. He produced a monogrammed glove from his pocket, its delicate embroidery gleaming in the dim light. This was found near the secret passage, and it bears the initials VC Victor Crane, perhaps, or another, hiding behind his name. Ashburn's face paled, but he recovered quickly. You think Crane is your mastermind. The man's a wreck, a composer who drinks more than he writes. He's no phantom. Perhaps not, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But someone coerced him. Someone with power and cunning. I intend to find them, and I will need your cooperation. Lord Ashburn, unless, of course, you prefer to remain a suspect. Ashburn's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Very well. What do you propose? A small deception, Poirot said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We will spread word that I have uncovered a witness, a guest who saw the Phantom's face. This witness, we will say, is under my protection, but their identity is known only to me. If the Phantom is among us, they will act to silence this. Fred Ashburn's eyes widened. You're staging a trap. That's madness, Poirot. If this Phantom is as dangerous as you claim, then we must be more cunning, Poirot interrupted. You will ensure the rumor spreads tonight, subtly, among the guests. I will handle the rest. Ashburn hesitated, then gave a curt nod. I hope you know what you're doing, Poirot. Always, Poirot replied, his mustache twitching with the ghost of a smile. The rumor spread like wildfire through the ballroom, whispered behind fans and passed in furtive glances. Poirot watched from a shadowed alcove, his eyes tracking the reactions of key figures. Lady Beatrice, now under scrutiny for a role in the smuggling, stood near the orchestra, her mask a delicate lace affair that did little to hide her unease. Victor Crane, pale and unsteady, lingered near the champagne table, his fingers trembling as he reached for a glass. Clara Duval, released from detention, but still shaken, kept to the edges of the crowd, her eyes darting nervously. Poirot's plan required patience, but he was a master of waiting. He had arranged for a trusted footman, one of the few he was certain was untainted by the smuggling ring, to pose as the witness under guard. In a private room upstairs, the footman, a young man named Thomas, had been briefed thoroughly, remain visible, act nervous, and report any approaches directly to Poirot. Meanwhile, Poirot had ensured the room was accessible only through a single door, which he could monitor from a concealed vantage point. As the clock struck 11, the orchestra launched into a lively waltz, and the guests spun across the floor. In a dizzying whirl of color and light, Poirot's gaze never wavered. He noted Clara Duval's sudden departure from the ballroom, her silk gown trailing behind her as she slipped through a side door. Victor Crane followed moments later, his movements jerky, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Poirot's heart quickened. The trap was working. He followed at a discreet distance, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. The corridor Clara had taken led to the east wing, where the witness was supposedly guarded. Poirot paused at a corner, peering around, to see Clara hesitate before a locked door. She glanced around, then produced a small key from her reticule and unlocked it, slipping inside. Victor Crane appeared seconds later, his face a mask of desperation as he followed her. Poirot's mind raced. Clara and Victor, connected by their past affair, were both entangled in the smuggling ring. But were they acting on their own, or were they puppets of the phantom? He crept closer, his hand resting lightly on the door handle, listening for any sound within. A muffled cry broke the silence, followed by a thud. Poirot pushed the door open, his heart pounding, and stepped into the dimly lit room. Clara stood, frozen, a dagger in her hand, its blade glinting in the candlelight. Victor lay at her feet, unconscious, a trickle of blood seeping from a wound on his temple. The footman, Thomas, was nowhere to be seen. Mademoiselle Duval, Poirot said, his voice calm, but laced with steel. What have you done? Clara's eyes widened, the dagger trembling in her grip. It's not what you think, Monsieur Poirot. He attacked me. I was defending myself. Poirot's gaze flicked to Victor's prone form, then back to Clara. And where is the witness, Thomas? He was to be here, under guard. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted to the side, toward a heavy curtain that concealed a window or, Poirot suspected, another entrance to the secret passage. He moved swiftly, pulling the curtain aside to reveal a narrow door, slightly ajar. Footsteps echoed faintly from within, growing fainter by the second. Stay here, Poirot commanded Clara, his tone brooking no argument. He stepped into the passage, his small flashlight casting a narrow beam into the darkness. The air was damp, the walls rough-hewn stone, and the faint scent of perfume lingered, a scent he recognized from the victims. His pulse quickened. The phantom was close. The passage twisted and turned, leading deeper into the manor's underbelly. Poirot moved cautiously, his ears straining for any sound. A faint rustle ahead made him pause, and he pressed himself against the wall, extinguishing his light. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and masked, moving with the stealth of a predator. Poirot held his breath, waiting until the figure passed before stepping forward. You move well, mon ami, Poirot said softly, his voice echoing in the confined space, but not well enough to escape Hercule Poirot. The figure froze, then spun, their mask a blank white oval that gleamed eerily in the dim light. You're a fool, Poirot, a low, distorted voice hissed. You think you can trap me? I am the one who sets the traps. Then why do you run? Poirot countered, stepping closer. A true mastermind does not flee from a little Belgian detective. The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You're clever, I'll give you that. But you're too late. The witness is dead, and your evidence is ashes. Poirot's heart sank, but he kept his expression impassive. Thomas is dead, a pity. But you underestimate me, mon ami. The witness was a fiction, a lure to draw you out, and here you are. The figure's posture shifted, a subtle tightening that betrayed their unease. You're bluffing. Am I? Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. Then why do you hesitate? Strike me down, if you are so confident. For a moment, the figure seemed to consider it, their hand twitching toward a concealed weapon. Then, with a snarl, they turned and bolted down the passageway. Poirot gave chase, his short legs moving with surprising speed. The passage opened into a wider chamber, its walls lined with crates smuggled goods, no doubt. The figure darted behind a stack, and Poirot followed, his flashlight sweeping the shadows. A sudden blow struck his arm, sending the flashlight skittering across the floor. Poirot stumbled, but regained his balance, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The figure lunged again, a blade flashing, but Poirot sidestepped, using his cane to parry the attack. The clash of metal rang out, and Poirot seized the moment, grabbing the figure's wrist and twisting until the blade fell. "Enough," Poirot snapped, his voice sharp with authority. "You are caught, mon ami. Remove your mask." The figure struggled briefly, then went limp, their shoulders slumping in defeat. With a slow, deliberate motion, they reached up and pulled off the mask, revealing a face Poirot had not expected. Ambassador Leclerc, the supposed friend of the murdered. "Monsieur Dubois." "Leclerc," Poirot said, his voice tinged with both triumph and sorrow. "The phantom." At last, Leclerc's eyes burned with defiance, but his voice was steady. "You think you've won, Poirot? This is bigger than you know. The syndicate will not stop, not for you, not for anyone." "Then they will fall, as you have," Poirot replied. He produced a pair of handcuffs borrowed from a cooperative footman and secured Leclerc's wrists. "You ordered the murders of Dubois and the footman, coerced Victor Crane, and manipulated Lady Beatrice, all to protect your empire of smuggled jewels," Leclerc sneered. "You have no proof. The ledger, the glove, the perfume," Poirot said, ticking off the clues on his fingers. "And now, your own confession, overheard by witnesses." He gestured to the shadows, where Lord Ashburn and the footman had appeared. Summoned by a prearranged signal, Leclerc's defiance crumbled, and he sagged against the crate. "You're a devil, Poirot." "No," Poirot said softly. "I am merely a man who seeks justice." The aftermath was swift. Leclerc was taken into custody, his confession recorded by a hastily summoned magistrate. The guests, unaware of the drama unfolding below, continued their dance, but the air felt lighter, as if the manor itself had exhaled. Poirot returned to the ballroom, his suit slightly rumpled, but his demeanor as composed as ever. Clara Duval approached him, her face pale, but resolute. "Is it over, Monsieur Poirot?" "For now," he replied, his eyes kind but guarded. "But the heart of man is ever prone to greed. You, mademoiselle, must choose a better path." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I will try." As the orchestra played its final notes, Poirot stepped onto the balcony. The cool night air a balm after the stifling tension of the chase. The stars glittered above, indifferent to the machinations of men. Poirot lit a cigarette, a rare indulgence, and exhaled a plume of smoke, his mind already turning to the next mystery. The phantom was caught, but the syndicate remained. A hydra with many heads. Poirot knew this was not the end. But for tonight, justice had prevailed. He smiled faintly, content with a small victory, and turned back to the ballroom, ready to face whatever shadows awaited. He turned back to the manor, its grandeur now tinged with melancholy. The masquerade was over. The dancers unmasked, and justice had prevailed. Yet, as always, Poirot felt the weight of human nature, its capacity for both brilliance and betrayal. He adjusted his hat, his steps purposeful as he made his way to the waiting carriage. The night was not yet over, and Hercule Poirot was never truly at rest. The journey back to London would give him time to reflect, to prepare for the next challenge. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The phantom was no more, and Blackwood Manor could begin to heal. As the carriage rolled away, Poirot glanced at the manor one last time, its windows glowing like eyes in the night. The dance was done, but the world, he knew, would always have another mystery waiting. The ballroom, now empty, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next act in an endless play. Poirot, however, was already looking ahead, his mind sharp, his heart steady. The unmasking had been a triumph, but it was only one chapter in the story of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 9. The unmasking grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor shimmered under the glow of 1,000 candles, their flames flickering in the chandeliers like stars caught in a gilded cage. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that precedes a storm, as masked guests swirled across the polished floor, their costumes more elaborate than ever. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. His plan, meticulously crafted, was about to unfold. The Phantom, the elusive mastermind behind the smuggling ring and the murders, would soon step into the trap he had set. Tonight, the mask would fall, and the truth would be laid bare. Poirot adjusted his own mask, a simple black domino that concealed just enough to blend into the sea of feathers, sequins, and velvet. His mind, however, was unmasked, its gears turning with precision. The events of the past days, the poisoned diplomat, the strangled footman, the smuggled jewels, the burned ledger had all pointed to this moment. The monogrammed glove, found in Victor Crane's possession, had been the final thread in the tapestry of clues. Crane's confession under pressure had revealed the existence of the Phantom, a figure who manipulated the smuggling ring from the shadows. But who was the Phantom? Poirot's instincts told him the answer was here, hidden among the dancers. The orchestra struck up a waltz, its haunting melody weaving through the laughter and clinking glasses. Poirot's gaze darted to Lord Reginald Ashburn, who stood near the grand staircase, his silver cane gleaming under the candlelight. Ashburn's confession to funding the smuggling ring had been a half-truth. Poirot was certain. The man's evasive demeanor and the insignia on his cane matching the locket found with Clara Duval suggested deeper involvement, yet Poirot's suspicions also lingered on Ambassador Leclerc, the supposed friend of the murdered Monsieur Dubois. Leclerc's polished charm and impeccable alibis had raised no red flags among the other guests, but Poirot had noted the ambassador's subtle glances, the way his hand lingered near his pocket during tense moments. A man hiding something, perhaps. Poirot's plan hinged on the rumor he had spread earlier that day, a fabricated tale of a witness who had seen the Phantom's face. The bait was simple but effective. The true culprit, fearing exposure, would act either to flee, to silence the supposed witness, or to reveal themselves in a moment of panic. Poirot had positioned himself to watch for any such move. He had also enlisted the help of Blackwood Manor's loyal butler, Mr. Grayson, who now patrolled the edges of the ballroom, his eyes trained on the exit's dot as the waltz reached its crescendo. Poirot noticed a figure slip through the crowd toward the terrace doors. The guest wore a crimson cloak adorned with gold embroidery, their face obscured by a mask shaped like a raven's head. The figure's movements were deliberate, too purposeful for a casual stroll. Poirot followed, keeping his distance, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. The terrace was bathed in moonlight, the cool night air a stark contrast to the ballroom's warmth. The crimson-cloaked figure paused near a stone balustrade. Glancing back as if sensing pursuit, Poirot stepped into the shadows of a towering topiary. His heart steady but his senses alert, the figure reached into their cloak, producing a small object, a vial, perhaps, or a weapon. Before Poirot could act, a second figure emerged from the ballroom, Clara Duval, her silver gown catching the moonlight, her mask, a delicate filigree of stars. Did little to hide her anxious expression, she approached the crimson figure, her voice low but audible. "You promised me safety," Clara whispered, her words trembling. "You said if I kept silent, no harm would come to me." The crimson figure turned, their voice muffled by the mask but unmistakably cold. "You were a fool to trust me, Clara. You know too much." Poirot's pulse quickened. This was no chance encounter. Clara, it seemed, had been drawn into his trap, but not as the witness. He had never named her in the rumor. The crimson figure's reaction confirmed they were the Phantom, or at least someone deeply entangled in the syndicate's web. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the night. "Monsieur, or perhaps Madame," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "The game is over. The mask you wear cannot hide the truth from Hercule Poirot." The crimson figure froze, their hand tightening around the object in their grip. Clara gasped, stepping back. Before the situation could escalate, Mr. Grayson appeared at the terrace doors, flanked by the footman. The crimson figure spun, assessing their options. then bolted toward the garden path. Poirot, surprisingly agile for a man of his stature, gave chase, his cane tapping rhythmically against the stone. The pursuit led through the manor's sprawling gardens, past rose bushes and marble statues, the moonlight casting long shadows that danced like specters. The crimson figure was fast, but Poirot's determination was relentless. He had anticipated an escape attempt and had instructed Grayson to secure the perimeter. As the figure reached a wrought iron gate, they found it locked, the key nowhere. In sight, trapped, they turned to face Poirot, their chest heaving. "Remove your mask," Poirot ordered, his voice steady despite the exertion. "The charade ends now." The figure hesitated, then slowly lifted the raven mask. The face revealed was that of Ambassador Leclerc, his polished features contorted with defiance. Poirot's suspicions had been correct, but the victory was bittersweet. Leclerc, a man of influence and charm, had orchestrated the murders to protect his control over the smuggling ring. "You cannot prove anything, Poirot," Leclerc spat, his voice laced with venom. "This is a masquerade, a game of shadows. You have no evidence." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile beneath it. "Monsieur Leclerc, you underestimate the little gray cells, the glove, the insignia, the ledger they all point to. You, and now, your own words to Mademoiselle Duval betray your guilt." Leclerc's eyes darted to the approaching footman, then back to Poirot in a desperate move. He lunged, the object in his hand revealed to be a small dagger. Poirot sidestepped with surprising grace, his cane swinging upward to knock the weapon from Leclerc's grasp. The dagger clattered to the ground, and the footman seized Leclerc. Pinning his arms, Clara, who had followed at a distance, approached, her face pale. "I didn't know he was the Phantom," she said, her voice breaking. "He threatened me, said he'd kill me if I spoke of the smuggling." Poirot nodded, his expression softening. "You are safe now, mademoiselle. The truth has a way of protecting those who seek it." The ballroom, when they returned, was in chaos. Guests had heard the commotion, and whispers of a chase spread. Like wildfire, Lord Ashburn stood at the center of the room, his face a mask of feigned shock. Poirot, however, was not finished. He climbed the grand staircase, raising a hand for silence. The orchestra stopped, and all eyes turned to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice carrying with authority, "tonight, the masquerade has revealed more than faces. A murderer stands among us, one who believed the shadows would conceal their crimes. Ambassador Leclerc, known to some as the Phantom, orchestrated the deaths of Monsieur Dubois and the footman to protect the smuggling empire. But no mask can hide from the truth." A gasp rippled through the crowd as Leclerc, now unmasked and restrained, was led into the room. Poirot continued, detailing the evidence, the monogrammed glove, the ledger's coded messages, and Leclerc's own admission on the terrace. The guests listened, spellbound, as Poirot wove the threads of the case into a coherent narrative. Lady Beatrice, already arrested for a role in the smuggling, had been a pawn, manipulated by Leclerc's promises of wealth. Victor Crane, too, had been coerced, his love for Clara exploited by the Phantom's threats. As Poirot spoke, he noticed Lord Ashburn's hand tighten around his cane. The man's involvement, though not as the mastermind, was undeniable. Poirot turned to him, his eyes piercing. "Lord Ashburn, your role in funding the smuggling ring is known. Your cooperation with the authorities may yet redeem you." Ashburn's face paled, but he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the guests like a fog. Leclerc, realizing the futility of resistance, slumped in the footman's grip, his defiance replaced by resignation. The authorities arrived shortly after, summoned by Grayson at Poirot's instruction. Leclerc was taken into custody, his diplomatic status no shield against the evidence Poirot had amassed. The guests, shaken but relieved, began to disperse, their masks now seeming frivolous in the face of such revelations. Poirot Poirot lingered in the ballroom, his gaze drifting to the chandeliers. Clara approached, her eyes red but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, I don't know how to thank you. I was so afraid." Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, fear is a mask, we all wear it. Thomas, you have removed yours, and that is a brave thing." As the last guest departed, Poirot stepped onto the terrace, the night air cool against his skin. The stars above were bright, unclouded by the deceit that had plagued Blackwood Manor. He thought of Monsieur Dubois, the diplomat whose curiosity had cost him his life, and the footman, an innocent caught in a web of greed. Their deaths had been avenged, but Poirot's mind lingered on the cost of deception, the way it twisted trust and loyalty into weapons. Chapter 10. The final bow of dawn broke over Blackwood Manor with a gentle, golden hue, as though the estate itself sighed in relief after the tumult of the masquerade. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the grand lawn, his small, immaculate figure framed against the sprawling gardens, now bathed in the soft light of morning. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and roses, a stark contrast to the heavy perfume of intrigue that had cloaked the manor for days. His mustache twitched slightly as he adjusted his hat, his gray eyes scanning the horizon, where the mist clung to the rolling hills. The case was solved, the culprits unmasked, but Poirot's mind, ever restless, turned over the events like a jeweler inspecting a gem for flaws. Inside, the manor was quieter now, its opulent halls emptied of the frenetic energy of the ball. The servants moved with a subdued efficiency, clearing away the remnants of the chaos, shattered champagne flutes, torn streamers, and the lingering echoes of a night that had spiraled into murder. Poirot had been invited to stay for a final dinner, a gesture from the new steward of Blackwood Manor, a young man named Thomas Grayson, who had taken over after Lord Ashburn's disgrace. The invitation was not merely a courtesy. It was a chance for the remaining guests to find closure, to lay the ghosts of the masquerade to rest. Poirot made his way back to the manor, his polished shoes clicking softly on the gravel path. The grand oak doors loomed ahead, their intricate carvings now seeming less foreboding in the daylight. As he entered, he was greeted by Clara Duval, her face no longer shadowed by fear, but softened by a tentative hope. She wore a simple dress of pale blue, a far cry from the extravagant gown she had donned at the ball, and her dark hair was pulled back, revealing eyes that carried both gratitude and a lingering sadness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but warm, "I hoped I might find you before the dinner. I owe you so much." Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of polite modesty. "Mademoiselle Duval, it is not I who deserves thanks, but the truth, which always finds its way to the light. You, I think, have found a path forward, non?" Clara's lips curved into a small smile. "I'm trying. After everything, Victor. The smuggling, the lies, I want to start anew, perhaps in Paris, or somewhere quiet where I can paint again." "Painting?" Poirot mused, his eyes twinkling. "A noble pursuit, mademoiselle. The canvas does not lie, but it allows one to create truth from chaos. You will do well." They walked together toward the dining hall, where a modest table had been set for the evening. The room, once a stage for opulence, now felt intimate, its long mahogany table adorned with a simple white cloth and a centerpiece of fresh lilies. The remaining guests were few. Thomas Grayson, the new steward, whose earnest demeanor suggested a desire to restore the manor's honor. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a botanist who had been a peripheral figure at the ball but whose sharp intellect had aided Poirot in identifying the poison, and Captain Harold Wentworth, a retired military man whose gruff exterior hid a loyal heart. Each had been touched by the events of the masquerade, and each had chosen to stay, perhaps to seek redemption or simply to witness the end of the affair. As they sat, the conversation began tentatively, the clink of cutlery punctuating the quiet. Poirot, seated at the head of the table at Grayson's insistence, observed his companions with his usual acuity. He noted the way Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her glass, The way Dr. Marsh's eyes darted to the windows as if expecting another disaster, and the way Captain Wentworth's shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. The meal was simple roast lamb, herb potatoes, and a light consomme, but it was a bomb after the excesses of the ball. Monsieur Poirot, Grayson began, his voice earnest. We owe you a great deal. Blackwood Manor might have crumbled under the weight of its secrets if not for you. Poirot waved a hand dismissively. Non. Monsieur Grayson, it is the manor that has endured, and it will continue to do so under your care. The secrets, they are like dust, sweep them away, and the beauty of the place remains. Dr. Marsh leaned forward, her sharp eyes glinting with curiosity. But surely, Monsieur Poirot, you must feel some satisfaction. You unraveled a web that stretched from this manor to an international syndicate. That's no small feat. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of amusement. Satisfaction, Madame Marsh, perhaps a little. But the mind of Hercule Poirot, it is never content to rest. Each case, it is a puzzle, and when the pieces are placed, there is only the briefest moment of calm before the next puzzle calls. Captain Wentworth chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. You're a queer sort, Poirot. Most men would be crowing about catching a villain like Leclerc. But you're already thinking of the next one. Poirot's eyes sparkled. The world, Captain, it is full of puzzles. And Hercule Poirot, he is never far from one. The conversation turned to lighter matters. Grayson's plans to restore the manor's gardens, Dr. Marsh's upcoming lecture on rare orchids, and Clara's tentative dreams of a new life. Yet Poirot's mind, ever active, lingered on the case. He thought of Ambassador Leclerc, the Phantom, whose polished exterior had hidden a ruthless ambition. He thought of Lady Beatrice, whose greed had led her to betray her own allies. And he thought of Victor Crane, a man broken by love and coercion, whose confession had been the final key to unlocking the syndicate's secrets. As the meal drew to a close, Clara rose, her expression resolute. Monsieur Poirot, I've been thinking. The locket, the one with the insignia, it's the last piece of this I still carry. I want you to have it. She reached into her pocket and produced the small silver locket, its surface edged with the mysterious insignia that had tied Lord Ashburn to the smuggling ring. Poirot took it gently, turning it over in his gloved hands. Mademoiselle, this is a generous gesture, but I cannot accept this locket. It is a reminder of your strength, of the truth you helped uncover. Keep it not as a burden, but as a symbol of your resolve to move forward. Clara's eyes glistened, but she nodded, slipping the locket back into her pocket. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for everything. The dinner concluded with a toast to new beginnings, the clink of glasses echoing softly in the room. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze drifting to the portrait of Lord Ashburn that still hung above the fireplace. The man's stern face seemed to mock the manor's newfound peace, but Poirot merely smiled. The past, he knew, could not be undone, but the future could be shaped. Later that evening, Poirot stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens, the stars above twinkling like the jewels that had sparked so much bloodshed. The air was cool, and the silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of a night bird. He thought of the human heart, its capacity for greed, for betrayal, but also for redemption. Clara Duval, he sensed, would find her way. Blackwood Manor, too, would heal under Grayson's care. And as for Hercule Poirot, he would continue, as he always did, to seek the truth in a world full of shadows. The next morning, Poirot prepared to depart. His bags were packed with his usual precision, his hat and cane ready for the journey. Grayson and Clara saw him to the station, where a train waited to carry him to London and, perhaps, to his next case. As the train's whistle sounded, Poirot turned to Clara, his eyes warm. Mademoiselle, remember this, the truth. It is a light that never fades. Carry it with you, and you will never be lost. Clara smiled, her voice soft but firm. I will, Monsieur Poirot, Safe travels. With a final tip of his hat, Poirot boarded the train, settling into his compartment with a sigh of contentment. The case of the Masquerade was closed, its mysteries laid bare. As the train pulled away, he gazed out at the receding silhouette of Blackwood Manor, its towers stark against the morning sky. The world, he knew, would always have its secrets, but Hercule Poirot would be there to unravel them, one puzzle at a time. The journey to London was quiet, the rhythmic clatter of the train a soothing counterpoint to Poirot's thoughts. He opened his notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes from the case, and began to write a final entry. The masquerade at Blackwood Manor, he wrote, was a dance of deception, where masks hid not only faces but truths. Yet, as always, the truth prevailed, for it is the nature of Hercule Poirot to see what others do not. He closed the notebook, his fingers lingering on its leather cover. The stars had faded with the dawn, but their light lingered in his mind, a reminder of the clarity that came with solving a mystery. As the train sped onward, Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed, already anticipating the next challenge that awaited him in the days that followed. Blackwood Manor began to heal. Thomas Grayson oversaw the restoration of the gardens, planting new roses where the old had withered. Dr. Marsh returned to her studies, her lecture on orchids drawing a crowd that marveled at her passion. Captain Wentworth, ever the stoic, took to mentoring the young men of the nearby village, teaching them discipline and honor. And Clara Duval, with the locket as her talisman, booked passage to Paris, where she would paint under the open sky, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Poirot, meanwhile, arrived in London to find a letter waiting for him, a new case, a new puzzle. He smiled as he read it, his mustache twitching with anticipation. The world, it seemed, would never run out of mysteries, and Hercule Poirot would never tire of solving them. And so, as the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, Poirot prepared for his next adventure, his mind as sharp as ever, his heart steady with the certainty that justice, like the stars, would always find a way to shine. To have it, she reached into her pocket and produced the small, silver locket, its surface etched with the mysterious insignia that had tied Lord Ashburn to the smuggling ring. Poirot took it gently, turning it over in his gloved hands. Mademoiselle, this is a generous gesture, but I cannot accept this locket. It is a reminder of your strength, of the truth you helped uncover. Keep it, not as a burden, but as a symbol of your resolve to move forward. Clara's eyes glistened, but she nodded, slipping the locket back into her pocket. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for everything. The dinner concluded with a toast to new beginnings, the clink of glasses echoing softly in the room. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze drifting to the portrait of Lord Ashburn that still hung above the fireplace. The man's stern face seemed to mock the manor's newfound peace, but Poirot merely smiled. The past, he knew, could not be undone, but the future could be shaped. Later that evening, Poirot stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens, the stars above twinkling like the jewels that had sparked so much bloodshed. The air was cool, and the silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of a night bird. He thought of the human heart, its capacity for greed, for betrayal, but also for redemption. Clara Duval, he sensed, would find her way. Blackwood Manor, too, would heal under Grayson's care. And as for Hercule Poirot, he would continue, as he always did, to seek the truth in a world full of shadows. The next morning, Poirot prepared to depart. His bags were packed with his usual precision, his hat and cane ready for the journey. Grayson and Clara saw him to the station, where a train waited to carry him to London and, perhaps, to his next case. As the train's whistle sounded, Poirot turned to Clara, his eyes warm. Mademoiselle, remember this, the truth. It is a light that never fades. Carry it with you, and you will never be lost. Clara smiled, her voice soft but firm. I will, Monsieur Poirot, Safe travels. With the final tip of his hat, Poirot boarded the train, settling into his compartment with a sigh of contentment. The case of the Masquerade was closed, its mysteries laid bare. As the train pulled away, he gazed out at the receding silhouette of Blackwood Manor, its towers stark against the morning sky. The world, he knew, would always have its secrets, but Hercule Poirot would be there to unravel them, one puzzle at a time. The journey to London was quiet, the rhythmic clatter of the train a soothing counterpoint to Poirot's thoughts. He opened his notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes from the case, and began to write a final entry. The Masquerade at Blackwood Manor, he wrote, was a dance of deception, where masks had not only faces but truths. Yet, as always, the truth prevailed. For it is the nature of Hercule Poirot to see what others do not. He closed the notebook, his fingers lingering on its leather cover. The stars had faded with the dawn, but their light lingered in his mind, a reminder of the clarity that came with solving a mystery. As the train sped onward, Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed, already anticipating the next challenge that awaited him in the days that followed. Blackwood Manor began to heal. Thomas Grayson oversaw the restoration of the gardens, planting new roses where the old had withered. Dr. Marsh returned to her studies, her lecture on orchids drawing a crowd that marveled at her passion. Captain Wentworth, ever the stoic, took to mentoring the young men of the nearby village, teaching them discipline and honor. And Clara Duval, with the locket as her talisman, booked passage to Paris, where she would paint under the open sky, her heart lighter than it had been in years.